We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stokely, A Life by Peniel E. Joseph. This is from the preface. Stokely Carmichael is a troubling icon of America's civil rights years. His Black Power call became a national Rorschach test. Whereas many blacks viewed it as righteous, many whites saw violent foreboding. Newspapers brooded over Carmichael's words, quickly forming a consensus that judged the slogan to be at best intemperate and at worst a blatant call for anti-white violence and reverse racism. In 1966, Black Power reverberated around the world, galvanizing blacks, outraging whites, and inspiring a cross-section of ethnic and racial minorities. In 1969, Carmichael left the United States for Conakry, Guinea, where he reinvented himself as a roving Pan-Africanist organizer and professional revolutionary. For the next 30 years, he remained an energetic dissident, a throwback to the heady years of the 1960s. Carmichael turned the quest for black political power into his life's work. His faith in a style of politics many considered anachronistic came out of the same tenacity and stubbornness that once made him one of the most effective and controversial activists of his generation. These same qualities, however, limited Carmichael's efforts as a Pan-Africanist political mobilizer. Before leaving America, Stokely resigned as Black Power's glamorous enfant terrible. Telegenic, brash, equal parts angry and gregarious, whether dressed in three-piece suits, leather jackets, sharecroppers' overhauls, or African dashikis, Carmichael became to represent the era's multifaceted identity, a hipster hero whose easy grace allowed him to consort effortlessly with both the dignified and the damned. The name Stokely Carmichael first came into my consciousness when I was a young boy coming of age in New York City. As the proud son of a Haitian mother who belonged to local 1199 Hospital Workers Union, part of SEIU, I grew up hearing stories of how civil rights activists, Black Power revolutionaries, Pan-Africanist freedom fighters, and trade unionists helped to shape a new world in America and beyond. By the time I was in elementary school, I was on my first picket line, accompanying my mother in support of an 1199 strike. Both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King supported 1199 during the 1960s. Stokely Carmichael's political importance came into sharper focus when I was in junior high after the premiere of the landmark PBS documentary series Eyes on the Prize, which featured the 24-year-old Carmichael's fiery Black Power speech and rightly characterized Stokely as his generation's heir to Malcolm X. Over the course of a decade of research on Carmichael, I would come to understand him as that and much more. Carmichael's youth, casual dress, and charisma made him an easily identifiable hero, one whose quick smile and passionate speeches left an indelible impression. An adopted son of the South by way of Trinidad, the Bronx, and Harlem, Stokely adapted to while transforming whatever environment he encountered. As a native New Yorker growing up in the city's tense racial climate of the 1980s, I found Carmichael's survival instincts appealing. As a young graduate student in Philadelphia, I had the opportunity to hear him speak and briefly met him afterward. He encouraged me to stay committed to the Black freedom movement, a struggle he defined as infinite. With his flowing African robes, gray hair, and white beard, he looked like a prince. And he had changed his name. He was no longer Stokely Carmichael. as Malcolm Little had become Malcolm X and later El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, Stokely had become Kwame Ture. It was a name that paid homage to his two African heroes, men who had been the first presidents of their countries, Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah and Guinea's Sekou Touré. Kwame Ture spelled the Guinean's name not as the French did, as white Europeans did, but as Arabs and Muslims did. Sekou Touré, S-E-K-U-T-U-R-E. As a college student, Carmichael helped transform America by organizing sit-ins, demonstrations, and voter registrations during the Civil Rights Movement's heroic years, a period that roughly encompasses the decade between the 1954 Brown v. Board Supreme Court decision, desegregation decision, and the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and has become enshrined in public memory through national holidays, films, commemorations, and monuments. Carmichael's deep sense of justice contributed to his evolution into Kwame Ture, the Pan-Africanist revolutionary and anti-capitalist organizer who moved to West Africa and remained tenacious in the face of searing political setbacks. Carmichael ultimately judged America incapable of creating the free and just world he had struggled for as a young man. But despite living in Africa for the final 30 years of his life, Carmichael's legendary stature as a black power activist lingered even if many ignored his lasting contributions to civil rights struggles that included a bruising quest for the vote in the Deep South. Although today largely forgotten, Stokely Carmichael remains one of the protean figures of the 20th century, a revolutionary who passionately believed in self-defense and armed rebellion, even as he revered nonviolence. The book Stokely, A Life, by Peniel L. Joseph.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, Joe Biden is back. He's post-COVID now. He's testing negative. In fact, he's given his speech in the Rose Garden as we speak. So that's good news. Welcome to our Wednesday program today. We got a lot to talk about. I want to start out with my rant today from Hartmann Report. Welcome to the Anthropocene, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, the age of human die-offs. Also, we now know Trump, made his much heralded return to Washington, D.C. a day before yesterday and gave a speech Tuesday night, or actually last night, yesterday, and gave a speech last night. And, the parts of the speech that I thought were most interesting are pretty much not being covered by the press. He's calling for internment camps. He's calling for martial law. He's calling for mass executions. Seriously, I'll tell you about that in about 15 minutes. In our second hour, our one guest for the... we got two guests today. Professor Richard Wolff is going to drop by. How is the heat affecting the economy? And what will the new Fed rate hike do to our economy? And also in the second hour, they're coming after our health care again. Seriously, another lawsuit by another group of right-wing cranks out of Texas that they're going to push all the way to the Supreme Court to try to further gut the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, this time to hurt women who have just had children. Isn't that brilliant? We'll tell you about that in the second hour. And in the third hour of our program, Mike Rothschild, the investigative reporter, is going to be with us. How QAnon themes have now burrowed deep into the grand old party, the GOP, politics this year, and what that means for America. And also what Texas is doing to women. Does this even remotely appear pro-life? We'll talk about that, too. But I want to start out with my rant over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled, Welcome to the Anthropocene, the Age of Human Die-Offs. And I guess the largest point that I'm making in this article is that we have been living for the past couple hundred years, in large part because of our ability to use fossil fuels to increase our capacity to grow food. We have been living in a halcyon era, in an era of extraordinary prosperity and health. And I mean, even the poorest in the world are better off than the poorest in the world were 100 years ago or 200 years ago. We convert fossil fuels into fertilizer, which allows us to grow more food on the same amount of land. We convert fossil fuels into pesticides and herbicides, which allow us to outcompete our competitors, the weeds and the bugs. The result of this is that, we've gone from more than 70% of us being farmers 200 years ago to only 2% of us being farmers now, because our land has become so productive as a consequence of our use of fossil fuels. And guess what? Fossil fuels are becoming harder to get, harder to find, more expensive to produce, and they're destroying our planet. Now, this possibility that we are facing, in fact, I would say probability, that we are facing large-scale food shortages around the world. There's already famine going on in several countries in the world as we speak. But I'm talking about large-scale, like as in not just 2 or 3 countries, but dozens, maybe eventually hundreds of countries. And here in the United States, the depopulation of large parts of the United States. When Lake Mead is gone, what's that going to do? We've got the Colorado River is drying up. Jim Turr sent me a note this morning with a picture of the Rio Grande in New Mexico. It's just a trickle now. I mean, this is seriously impacting our ability to grow food, because these rivers and these reservoirs are the source of water that we use to irrigate our crops. Irrigation is another thing, again, provided by fossil fuels. It's not being irrigated with oil, but the pumps that get the water to the fields and put the water on the fields are all run by generally, either electricity or gasoline, and the electricity more often than not is made from fossil fuels. So here we are. Now, other cultures have experienced these kinds of population crashes as a consequence of running out of their food supply in the past. Probably the most well-documented one is the Maori people of New Zealand, who, 800 or 900 years ago first discovered that island. They were Melanesian sailors, and they discovered, 103,000 square mile island, New Zealand, and spent the next couple hundred years eating all the moa birds. These are giant birds like ostriches, only they weigh as much as 500 pounds. And you could just walk up to them and break their necks and eat them. And so for hundreds of years, the Maori just spread all across the island, and their population exploded, and the moa birds got fewer and became fewer and fewer and fewer until finally, all 12 species, they ate the last moa bird, this great extinction. And the consequence of that great extinction was that the Maori went from being a very peaceful people. In fact, in the archaeological record, there's literally no evidence of warfare during the first 300 years that they occupied New Zealand. None. They were a peaceful people. They didn't have spears and bows and arrows. They didn't need them. You could just walk up to a bird and break its neck and have dinner. But when the Moa were all gone, the Maori started, they changed, their culture changed. It became a warlike society. They began building forts all over the island. They would, when one war party went against another war party, they would bring food on the hoof, a captured prisoner. They had descended into cannibalism. Now, that was a local event. We also saw in North America, there's a new book out. I was reading it over this last weekend. That's just an amazing book. It's titled, hang on just a second, I'll get the title for you. Here it is, First Peoples in the New World, Populating Ice Age America by David Meltzer. It's just an amazing book, First Peoples in the New World. And he talks about how, we now have DNA tracking, right, for all these Aboriginal people, these indigenous people of North America. And there were dozens of tribes that had unique, distinct DNA signatures that literally no longer exist because they lived in parts of North America where the climate changed. This was the tail end of the Ice Age. The climate changed and all the food went away. And they died out. They literally died out. Periodic famine has been the norm for humanity throughout most of our history. But now we don't have the option that many people around the world have. You're seeing climate refugees right now. Guatemalan climate refugees are showing up at our southern border. Syrian climate refugees are showing up in Italy and Greece. We've got, Bangladeshi climate refugees are showing up throughout that region. But we're running out of places to go because now climate change is not local. It's affecting the entire planet. Yes, it's affecting different places, more vigorously than other places. Now, one of the stories, one of the learnings that I got out of this and out of this study, and I've been really digging into the Native American history of America for the last, month or two since I've been writing this new book, The Hidden History of American Democracy, because so much of our democracy was grounded on things like the Iroquois Confederacy and the Wendat people. But in digging into it, one of the things that I've learned is that a lot of anthropologists believe that one of the reasons that so many Native American societies had sustainability as their highest value, from low reproduction rates to maintaining their food supply, was because they had suffered through periods of famine in the past when they basically overkilled the local fauna and flora. So the question, and I wrap this article with this question, is, will we, like the ancient Maori, devolve into an authoritarian and war-based society? Well, Donald Trump gave a speech last night that gives us a clue to that. I'll tell you about that in a minute. Or will we, like the Iroquois or the Hopi or the Wendat people, make a conscious decision to live within our means, to stop destroying our environment, to fine-tune our governmental systems to meet the needs of all of our citizens? I mean, we're not without resources, and I would never bet against human ingenuity. But on the other hand, we're facing an unprecedented level of avarice mobilized by billionaires and corporations with more power and wealth than the world has literally ever seen before. Are they going to win and in the process set human civilization back millennia? Or will we, humanity, prevail over the forces of greed and destruction and help salvage our biosphere while reinventing our culture and our world? I mean, the hour is late. Scientists tell us it's not too late, but it's damn late. Our fate and that of the planet is still in our hands. We've got a lot of work to do, my friends. Let's get started. We'll be right back at 16 minutes past the hour. I got to tell you about Donald Trump's speech, particularly the parts the media has just chosen to ignore, which is totally weird. Stick around. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be right back in just a moment telling you about the Trump speech and picking up your phone calls. And welcome back. Omar in Herndon, Virginia. Hey, Omar, thanks for listening on the Thom Hartmann app. What's up?
Tom, the prophet, truth, justice, democracy, peace, prosperity, common good, and American way. Good day to you. Just if I may add to your point, I really think that we have to stop thinking, and not just you, but in general, a lot of people are pretending like the climate change, and I said this a couple of weeks ago, is that something's going to happen in the future. It's happening right now. The climate change is real. People need to start to know that it's happening right now. And I just wanted to say on that part. But what I wanted to talk to you about, I was listening to South Carolina Public Radio, and Lindsey Scam was on there.
Lindsey Scam,
okay. And he was basically saying that if Trump won the nomination, he's to take. Yeah. I mean, is Trump still that effective in this
Well,
part?
Yes and no. If you look at the polling nationwide, Trump beats DeSantis, and in fact, he's in a dead heat with Biden right now. On the other hand, if you look at the poll, and keep in mind, this is 2 years away from the election. If you look at the polling in the states that will have early primaries or have, high level of awareness of Donald Trump, like New Hampshire, for example, or Florida, Ron DeSantis is walking away with it. So I think that as we get closer to the Republican primary for president, which will be in a year and a half, or a year actually, it'll probably start in the middle of next year. I think that Trump is. Well, I've been saying this for a long time. Trump is toast. I just don't think he has a chance. He's getting increasingly desperate. He's getting increasingly frantic And, to have that power back so he can protect himself from prosecution. I mean, he came right out and said the other day, they want to put me in jail. I mean, he knows what's going on. He's terrified.
Yeah,
I mean, they've got to be doubling up his diapers.
Yeah, and he's talking about persecution. And I think the January 6th committee has a lot to do with it. I think it's weakening up his power, making him a lot weaker. But the other thing I want to talk to you is that I really think that this Brittany Griner situation, her being arrested by Putin, I think he's trying to do that to kind of turn the black vote against Biden and the Democrat in midterm and 2024. So that's Putin.
Could be. There's a Russian spy here in the United States who we've had in prison for almost 10 years, who's like a real high profile guy, and Putin wants him back. So it may, and Russia has already said that they would trade him for Brittany Griner. So, or at least they've implied that. They haven't. I don't think that they've diplomatically said yes, we'll do this as a quid pro quo, but they've made it clear that they're willing to entertain that conversation. And I'm guessing that conversation is going on. I would bet within a few months that Brittany is going to be free, and so is the Russian spy who's now in federal prison.
And Tom, why is it that we control Congress? Nancy Pelosi control Congress. Why is it Congress can change, overturn laws are being done by the Supreme Court? He talked about that, I believe, yesterday or the day before. Mm-hmm. Why is it that we're not using the power of Congress to turn Roe v. Wade or Citizens United?
Because it's a power that hasn't been used in 100 years or more. And so, Congress is unsure how it'll work out. They're afraid to go there. They want to try everything else first. I think they absolutely should go there. I know that if the Republicans were in power and the roles were reversed, they would definitely be going there. Yeah. But you're absolutely right, Omar. Congress does have the power. Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution. Read it. Omar, thank you. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Back during World War I under President Wilson, we had a windfall profits tax on war profiteers, essentially, of 95% above their normal profits. You were allowed to make your normal profits, but when you started making more than that, 95% tax on that income. President Franklin Roosevelt revisited the exact same thing, windfall profits tax, during World War II, saying he didn't want this war to produce any new war millionaires. During the Korean War, Dwight Eisenhower had a windfall profits tax. During the echo of the fall of the Shah of Iran, when all the Iranian oil was taken off the marketplace and the price spiked, President Ronald Reagan imposed a windfall profits tax on the oil and gas industry to stop exploitation of that. Now we have Senator Bernie Sanders in the Senate and Ed Markey as well, along with him, and Representative Jamal Bowman in the House saying, let's do the same thing now. There's a whole video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. So Trump gave a speech last night, and most of the media has been focusing on the one moment where he said, maybe I'm going to have to run again. Or words to that effect. But there were some other parts of his speech that are really worth paying attention to. There's Mark Sumner wrote a great summary of this over at dailycoz.com. Mark is just such a brilliant writer. I have so much respect for this guy. And Trump, he lays out that Trump came out and said, okay, I've got a solution to the homeless problem in America. Let's just round them all up and put them in concentration camps outside the cities. And so our cities will be beautiful again. He talked about, places where you can buy lots of land for cheap. Right, let's put them in the Mojave Desert. I mean, talk about a stupid idea that it was not thought through. That is just brutal. I mean, yeah, let's do like Hitler did. Let's start concentration camps. You'll recall the concentration camps that Hitler started, places like Dachau, were not death camps. The death camps came later. The concentration camps started in 34 and 35. The death camps didn't come until the 40s. And the concentration camps were where they put, quote, undesirable people, the enemies of the state, the homeless, the mentally ill, gays, socialists, Marxists, anybody who defied Hitler. Basically, they went to the concentration camps. And Trump is saying, oh, yeah, we should do that with homeless people, number one. I mean, this is bizarre. Number two, he said that we need to, he wants to crank up our criminal justice system and have, quote, very short trials, end quote. Now, we all know Trump has never read the Constitution, and so he's obviously never read the 6th, 7th, and 8th Amendments to the Constitution, which talk about, and the 5th, which talk about due process. The 6th, I believe, is the right to a speedy trial and a jury of your peers. And, you know, Trump has basically ignorant about this. You know, this is the guy who lived, according to his wife who recently died, who you know, spent his married life with a copy of a book, The Collected Speeches of Adolf Hitler, on the bed next to him. And now he wants to do what China's doing. He says, we need very short trials. And then he praised executing drug users like Duterte did in the Philippines. In the Philippines, Duterte authorized the police to simply shoot to kill anybody using drugs. Over 12,000 Filipinos were executed by the police. No judge, no jury, no arrest, no due process. They were just executed. And Trump is calling for the same thing now here in the United States. This is he wants police on every corner. I mean, he wants to turn America into China or into the Philippines, into an absolute police state. And in the midst of this, not a word about his followers killing 5 people on January 6th and trying to kill the Vice President and Speaker of the House of the United States. In fact, he said, and I quote, "We may just have to do it again." Really? He said, send the homeless to, quote, large parcels of inexpensive land. He said these camps could be created in one day. He also called for a return to stop and frisk policies, basically harass black and brown people, and said the idea of taking away a liability shield from the police, he's opposed to. He wants the police to be absolutely unaccountable. If they kill black people, fine, no problem. He said, their liability, he said, he opposed the idea of removing from police, quote, their liability shield in any way, shape, or form to prevent police, end quote, to prevent police from facing any consequences when they execute people on the streets. He said, where there is a true breakdown of law, in fact, he wants to bring the military out to enforce our laws. He wouldn't do it on January 6th, of course, but he said, without a trace of irony, he said, where there is a true breakdown of law and order, the federal government should send the National Guard to restore order and secure peace without having to wait for the approval of some governor who thinks it's politically incorrect to call them in. Right. It's all about, as Mark Sumner writes, it's all about authoritarianism and brutality. This is what Donald Trump is selling. And tragically, it's what as many as a third of Americans are buying. This is dangerous, dangerous stuff. I'll be back with your calls right after this break. 27 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Fair and only slightly unbalanced. I'll be right back with your calls. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Transgender Warriors, Making History from Joan of Arc to Marshall P. Johnson and Beyond by Leslie Feinberg. This is from the preface. Are you a guy or a girl? I've heard the question all my life. The answer is not so simple since there are no pronouns in the English language as complex as I am, and I don't want to simplify myself in order to neatly fit one or the other. There are millions more like me in the United States alone. We have a history filled with militant heroes and heroines, yet therein lies the rub. How can I tell you about their battles when the words woman and man, feminine and masculine are almost the only words that exist in the English language to describe all the vicissitudes of bodies and styles of expression? Living struggles accelerate changes in language. I heard language evolve during the 1960s when I came out into the drag bars of Western New York and Southern Ontario. At that time, the only words used to describe us, cut and seared, yelled at us from the window of a screeching car filled with potential bashers. There were no words that we'd go out of our way to use that made us feel good about ourselves. When we all first heard the word gay, some of my friends vehemently opposed the word on the grounds that it made us sound happy. No one will ever use gay, my friends assured me, each offering an alternative word, none of which took root. I learned that language can't be ordered individually as if it's from a Sears catalog. It is forged collectively in the fiery heat of struggle. Right now, much of the sensitive language that was won by the liberation movement in the United States during the 60s and 70s is bearing the brunt of a right-wing backlash as being politically correct. Where I come from, being politically correct means using language that respects other people's oppressions and wounds. This chosen language needs to be defended. The words I use in this book may become outdated in a very short time because the transgender movement is still young and defining itself. But while the slogans lettered on the banners may change quickly, the struggle will rage on. Since I am writing this book as a contribution to the demand for transgender liberation, the language I'm using in this book is not aimed at defining, but at defending the diverse communities that are coalescing. I don't have a personal stake in whether the trans liberation movement results in a new third pronoun or gender-neutral pronouns like the ones such as Z, she or he, and here, her, his, being experimented with in cyberspace. It is not the words in and of themselves that are important to me, it's our lives. The struggle of trans people over the centuries is not a his story or her story, it's a our story. I've been called a he, she, butch, bulldagger, crossdresser, passing woman, female to male transvestite, and drag king. The word I prefer to use to describe myself is transgender. Today, the word transgender has at least two colloquial meanings. It has been used as an umbrella term to include everyone who challenges the boundaries of sex and gender. It is also used to draw a distinction between those who reassign the sex they were labeled at birth and those of us whose gender expression is considered inappropriate for our sex. Presently, many organizations, from Transgender Nation in San Francisco to Monmouth Ocean Transgender on the Jersey Shore, use this term inclusively. I asked many self-identified transgender activists who are named or pictured in this book who they believed were included under the umbrella term. Those polled named transsexuals, transgender, transvestites, transgenderists, big enders, drag queens, drag kings, crossdressers, masculine women, feminine men, intersexuals, people referred to in the past as hermaphrodites, androgynes, cross-genders, shapeshifters, passing women, passing men, gender benders, gender blenders, bearded women, and women bodybuilders who have crossed the line of what is considered socially acceptable for a female body. But the word transgender is increasingly being used in a more specific way as well. The term transgenderist was first introduced into the English language by trans warrior Virginia Prince. Prince told me, quote, "I coined the term transgenderist in 1987 or 88. There had to be some name for people like myself who trans the gender barrier, meaning somebody who lives full-time in the gender opposite to their anatomy. I have not transed the sex barrier," end quote. As the overall transgender movement has developed, more people are exploring this distinction between a person's sex, female, intersexual, male, and their gender expression, feminine, androgynous, masculine, and other variations. Many national and local gender magazines and community groups are starting to use TS/TG, transsexual and transgender. Under Western law, doctors glance at the genitals of an infant and pronounce the baby female or male, and that's that. Transsexual men and women traverse the boundary of the sex they were assigned at birth. And in dominant Western cultures, the gender expression of babies is assumed at birth. Pink for girls, blue for boys. Girls are expected to grow up feminine, boys masculine. Transgender people traverse, bridge, or blur the boundary of the gender expression that they were assigned at birth. The book is Transgender Warriors Making History from Joan of Arc to Marsha P. Johnson and Beyond by Leslie Feinberg. Transgender Warriors. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. Picking up your calls. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, not too much, Tom. Hey, you were talking about climate change, and you mentioned, are we going to go the path of the warlike tribal confederations of North America, or the more peaceful? And I believe I believe we're going to go the warlike path of European tribal cultures.
It's very much a possibility.
Well, the reason why I say that is, and I'm not trying to be Mr. Smarty Pants. The reason why I say that is because if you look at Europe, it is really a subcontinent. The North American and South American tribes, they had a degree of geographical isolation. Okay, Europe was always been a crossroads. All right, that's led to all kinds of social tensions and basically a warlike evolution. And I believe we're seeing it play out now. And to tell you the truth, like you mentioned Donald Trump's speech, I'm glad you caught that because, he said things in there that were nonsensical, like syringes all over American streets. I was like, what decade is this guy living in? But see, that is all code. That is all code. Trump now is like a symbol to Trump voters. He's like the American flag, okay? He is a symbol, an icon. They know that it's nonsense. But just like Adolf Hitler, Adolf Hitler was obsessed with architecture. Okay, and making the cities great again in Germany and everything. You mentioned all that, but Hitler lacked the engineering prowess to make it happen. But some of those things they did make happen and exist to this day.
Yeah,
and
like the Autobahn, and the Volkswagen.
Yes, and as far as how does this relate to climate change is, look, man, I was listening to a right-wing show, and of course they were talking about how carbon dioxide is actually a good thing. They pump it into greenhouses, right?
Yeah. That's crazy.
It is crazy, but it's typical of the American right. But I heard a guy on the left, I'm not going to mention his name, I really respect him, but he was so depressed over Joe Manchin's betrayal on all this that he was actually talking about how CO2 is a good thing, too. And I just want to say that, look, man,
CO2
malaria
is not a good thing.
No, malaria used to be on every continent on this planet, okay? We're seeing the effects of climate change real and right now. And, as far as, if you want to look at through the geologic record, you got to go back to the Pliocene, which was 2.5 million years ago. A lot of vast inland seas. Florida was covered by an inland sea, et cetera. The Karoo Basin.
Right. What's the point you're trying to make here, Dave?
My point is climate change is here. It is real. And the results are if you look to the past, you will understand the present and the future.
Amen. That book thank you, Dave. That book I was talking about that I've been reading over the weekend, it was just breathtaking about all tribe after tribe after tribe across North America that suddenly the climate changed and they literally just died out. Suzanne in Dublin, Ohio. Hey, Suzanne, what's on your mind today?
Yes, I just want to add a thought to the beginning of your show about the food and water supply shortage. And if more people were vegan, and because it would help, because a lot of water is used, huge amounts of water to grow the grain, to feed the cattle and the animals.
Yep.
And not only would it benefit people's health, it would benefit the food and water shortages.
Yeah, I completely agree. I used to have, in the first edition of Prophet's Way, I had this, and I don't know if I have a copy of it here. I should look around for it. In any case, I had this whole long thing that John Robbins had written long ago about how much water it took to produce a pound of meat, how much grain it took, how much fossil fuel and everything else. And you are absolutely right, Suzanne. One of the major, agriculture is one of the major producers of fossil fuels, and agriculture is one of those areas, or at least the way that we eat, our food supply is one of those areas where we could make really significant changes that would reduce our carbon footprint hugely and would improve our overall health. But, you know, those changes are not being made right now because you've got industries that are very, very wealthy, the meat industry and the dairy industry in particular, very wealthy industries that, you know, because the Supreme Court legalized political bribery, they own enough politicians that they can prevent any kind of change at a systemic level. So we have to just campaign for it at the individual level and talk about, hey, you know, become a vegan or just, you know, cut your meat consumption or fish consumption or whatever it may be back to, you know, once a week or once a month. And not only will you be healthier, but the planet will be too. And you'll save money.
Yes. A lot of institutions don't want us to know this because they benefit monetarily from all that.
That's correct. And,
yeah.
Yep. You said it. Go ahead.
That's it. I just wanted to share
You said it very well, Suzanne. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Mark in Long Beach, California. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Well, the Southwest has a terrible water problem, and there's a partial solution going on right now. They're trying to refill the Salton Sea by pumping the treated wastewater over the hills and down into the Salton Sea. But they just want to import enough to fill it. Mm-hmm. But there's this idea of if instead of spending that $6 billion with that project, you bore a tunnel down to the Salton Sea, and you put all the reclaimed wastewater, which is like 900 million gallons a day go into the ocean of drinkable water. Then it could go down there. They would have more water than they need because
so the Salton Sea then becomes a reservoir for Southern California. Forgive me, I'm not all that familiar with the geography of the area.
Okay, well, then quickly, the Salton Sea, then you pump the salty water out of the Salton Sea into an area in the desert where then you spray it in the air, and 120-degree weather turns it into clouds, which blow up against the Chocolate Mountains and the Sierra Nevada Mountains, and it all rains down in the Colorado River, which is already infrastructure that's built to feed the area.
It's going to take an enormous amount of fossil fuel to make that happen. Well, I mean, wouldn't that energy be better put to work simply, you know, distilling seawater?
Well, no. This one, once it's built, gravity is your main power source to bring water downhill to the Salton Sea, which is below sea level.
Right, but you got to pump it uphill first.
No, you.
Los Angeles is basically at sea level. I mean, if you're going to get water up into the mountains there, you're going to have to pump it up.
That's why I said bore a hole downhill.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Okay.
So gravity powers.
It's an idea.
And then solar distills the water, and it comes back to existing infrastructure. I've been pushing it for 25 years with senators and representatives, but they all scurry away.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's an idea, Mark. Keep thinking, and keep promoting your ideas. Lee in Chicago. Hey, Lee, what's on your mind today?
I've been really disturbed that we are still allowing not only internet but VPN coming out of Russia. There's an immense amount of infrastructure and businesses that are being run in the United States out of people living and working out of Russia.
For example?
They run Zoom training. Things like Alibaba resellers are they're doing the artwork, the design work, the web design, the marketing. It's all being done out of Russia. And it's not being talked about, but you know what? It makes sense. And why do we allow the lines of communication to stay open with a country we're virtually at war with?
Yeah. It's a good question. I don't have an answer for you, Lee. It's
really troubling to me is the drug pricing. They keep talking about negotiating, and the way we buy everything in the U.S. government, we don't negotiate. We, from the GSA point of view, we say best price, period. When you don't give the best price, it's a 10-year prison sentence. So,
Yikes.
We need to go back to how we purchase things.
Right.
And no matter what you say, any negotiation, best price is still better.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, thank you, Lee. That's a lot of food for thought. Phoebe in Las Vegas. Hey, Phoebe, what's up?
Hi, good morning, Tom. So you started off the show talking about the Maori tribe.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting, and it reminded me of the book and the movie Cloud Atlas. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
I have not.
Well, it's really interesting, and it kind of speaks about the same theory where when humanity dehumanizes each other, it eventually devolves into cannibalism. Not to spoil the movie or anything, but basically what happens is they came out in 2012, but what happens is it started with slavery, and just the mere acceptance of that and not fighting against it in the book, it evolved throughout time where we just dehumanized each other. And then we eventually started creating clones, and then we started eating those clones as a source of food.
Yikes.
And then later, later on, in the far distant future, after all of this, people just started being cannibals.
Yeah.
And it's just a really frightening thought, but that's the natural progression of dehumanizing each other.
Yeah, it seems like a scary movie and book. Phoebe, thanks for the tip on that. But this is what happened. I mean, it's what happened to the Maori people. It's what has happened to tribal people around the world when confronted with famine. I mean, it's what happened to the Donner Party. You know? We'll be right back. It's 15 minutes before the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
Oh, this is interesting. Congress is holding a hearing right now, and they've called up some of the firearms manufacturers to testify about gun violence. So that'll be an interesting story. Check out. And welcome back, Steve in Bellingham, Washington. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Great show. I'm really glad people are calling in about climate change. It's like my number one issue, and for some reason it's not for a lot of people. I noticed one guy called in and said that, people think that it's in the future, whereas really the ravages of climate change are happening now.
Right.
And I think that's true. But to me, an even bigger problem is so many people have given up already. I just had a good talk with a good progressive liberal who said that she thought that everybody's mourning. There's a lot of mourning about climate change,
right,
as if the climate was already dead, you know.
Yeah.
And I have another friend who very liberal. He says he's worried about the world that his son will grow up in, but he's well off. He's a snowbird. He stays here in the summer and flies to Mexico every winter. Now, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. I'll admit, like, if he stopped doing that, we would still have a lot of climate change.
Sure.
You know, but people are living their lives as if it's too late. And that really upsets me.
Which is just another excuse for inaction.
Yeah. The power of the people, we don't know our own power. There's only a few hundred people in Congress and the White House and the Supreme Court. There's millions of us. And people don't realize how powerful we are, and we should learn that and use our power to stop global warming, not only on our own lives, like you said, eating less meat, electric cars, but also we need a lot more pressure on our elected representatives.
Amen. Amen. Well said, Steve. Steve, thank you very much. From Steve to Steve. Steve in Vallejo, California. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I don't know if you've been following the desalination plant in Huntington Beach.
I have not.
But, it was a planned development, and I think they're ready to build it. It's going to be like a $2 billion project. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, the Coastal Commission denied it at this level.
Really? Why?
Newsom is not. Well, because of the wastewater.
Oh. Because it produces so much brine.
Yeah, they haven't got that figured out for the locals.
Right.
And so I think it was 5-0 on the Coastal Commission. So it's kind of been low key but it's just kind of an embarrassment because obviously Southern California is in desperate need of the water.
Couldn't they just run a pipe like 3 miles out into the ocean and release it there?
Well, I don't understand the complexity of it, but the developers were really disappointed because they're ready to build it.
Yeah. Is there an appeal, or is it dead?
Well, I don't know what Newsom's point of view is. Obviously, he wants to protect the ocean, but he doesn't.
He also wants to protect the water supply.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess there needs to be more investigation of what's going on there.
Yeah, I'm with you. Okay, Steve, thank you very much for the call. And thanks for the heads up on that. I did not know. I haven't been following basically local California politics, haven't for a long time. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls. Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Available wherever you find fine books. An amazing new report out from the Global Alliance on Health and Pollution suggesting that pollution is causing around 9 million premature deaths around the world, but 4.5 million of those are the consequence of outdoor air pollution, and the major contributor to that outdoor air pollution is cars and trucks. It turns out that cars and trucks that burn fossil fuels produce little teeny tiny particles. They're called PM 2.5 because they're smaller than 2.5 microns, essentially microscopic, that bury themselves deep inside your lungs and then migrate to the heart, the brain. They cause damage throughout the body. They can even cause lung cancer and heart disease and things. And guess what? Electric cars produce none of this. Also, when you hit the brakes on a regular car, you're burning your brake pads and throwing particles out into the air. On an electric car, you hit the brakes, you're slowing it down with the motors. There's a video about the whole thing over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back, 9 minutes before the hour, picking up your calls. David in Woodland Hills. Hey, David, what's up?
Thank you, Tom. I am so angry. I've been studying global warming since the late 60s, and it's just unconscionable we've gotten to this point. And I'd like to address the conservatives who listen to your show and ask them, are you enjoying the heat? Because it's going to get a hell of a lot worse. And as Tom has taught us, no one is more responsible than the Republican Party from Ronald Reagan right up until now, where they're still denying it in public. They admit it in private. So vote Republican, and you are truly voting for hell on earth.
Excellent slogan, David. Thank you very much. Kenyatta in Los Angeles. Hey, Kenyatta, what's up?
Well, I am not easily surprised by anything in life, Tom, particularly the hyperbolic statements that are often given in a Trump speech. However, yesterday, that speech that he gave on his first visit back to Washington since the rioting and insurrection of January 6th really was chilling to me.
It had to be another Stephen Miller special, you know, and go ahead.
Yeah, well, you had spoken about him talking about making, and his exact words were, on the outskirts of our cities. It takes months and years to build a building, but you can put up a tent in a day. And we'll make bathrooms, they'll be hard and fast. These are the words he's using. Mm-hmm. But we'll put them there, and we'll have social workers and blah, 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 talking about the homeless. That was astonishing. Yeah. He was basically talking about, and I coined this phrase myself, homeless-tration camps, okay?
Yeah,
then
that's a good one.
He went on. He said the words, and I spent a brief part of my life, less than a couple of years in law enforcement, Tom, but it was enough for me to know that it wasn't for me. And because I know that mentality, and I'm not that person. But I will tell you, I became familiar enough with it to know that many cops are some sadistic bastards. And there's been a great deal of anger since the George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, that whole thing. And, during the old days, cops used to do what's called the blue flu. So if they were held to account for some questionable shooting or some questionable action, they would all call in sick because they're not by law they can't strike. That's now become what I call copstortion. So they decided that when they say we can't do our jobs, which basically means if we can't shoot black people in particular in the back, beat them up, disregard them, then we can't do our job, so we'll do nothing. And there's a ripple effect to that. There's going to be a backlash. I'm going to tell you something. If you look a certain way in this country, you'd better be damned concerned about Donald Trump or one of his clones getting in office. And that includes the midterms. Because, Tom, he used the word, our brave police officers, that phrase, 36 times in the first 20 minutes of that speech. I counted them.
Whoa.
He said, we're going to, and this is quote, we're going to have to be mean, brutal, and nasty against these criminals. We're not going to have a country anymore. They're taking your country. We're going to hell. I mean, it was unbelievable. It was unbelievable. And if he or those like him get in office, that's going to send a message. The United States, Donald Trump can't change the United States. The United States isn't any different because of Donald Trump. It is what it is. But what Donald Trump can do is give license for this stuff to be public. He said so. He talked about they're taking our police officers' protections. A police officer does something, now he's scared he's going to lose his pension. We've got to protect our police officers. We've got to let them go. We've got to let them do whatever they want to do. For me, let me tell you something. Thom Hartmann, that was one of the most chilling speeches I've ever heard in my life.
I think he's trying to radicalize the base of what he thinks will be the army that stands for him when the revolution happens, which is the police and the military. I think he's been trying to do that for 5 years now.
Oh, clearly they were complicit on January 6th. Are you kidding?
Yeah.
Listen, I saw at January 6th, and you probably remember this, there was a mob chasing this black Capitol policeman up the stairs, and he's backing up.
Eugene Goodman.
He's backing up the stairs. Let me tell you something. When have you ever seen a mob, quote unquote, of black people chasing after the police and they retreat?
No, never. You're right.
So the complicity with law enforcement and the military, this is very serious stuff. But I just wanted to say that it was so stark yesterday. It was Willie Horton, and, I'm not plugging any piece, but I wrote about this on an article called Copstortion, because what this backlash is going to be, if this happens in the next 24 months, if you are black and male in this country, you are going to be in deep trouble.
Yeah, and you won't plug your stuff, but I will. Kenyatta writes over at Op-Ed News, opednews.com, and some pretty brilliant stuff there. So, and you're
thanks,
calling
Tom,
it like you see it.
Well, you know what? I'm concerned, not so much for myself because I saw this coming, but I'm concerned for those of us that are still asleep and don't really know what the threat is that we're facing.
Yeah.
We're facing a lot of threats, both internationally and domestically. Great show, man. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenyatta. Good talking to you. We'll be back. I want to get into Professor Richard Wolff. What is the heat going to do to the economy, and what is the Fed going to do to the economy? And they're coming after our health care again. We'll pick up those conversations on the other side of this break.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today is Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism and Other Arguments for Economic Independence by Kristen Godsey. And this is from the introduction titled, You Might Be Suffering from Capitalism. The argument of this book can be summed up succinctly. Unregulated capitalism is bad for women. And if we adopt some ideas from socialism, women will have better lives. If done properly, socialism leads to economic independence, better labor conditions, better work-family balance, and yes, even better sex. Finding a way into a better future requires learning from the mistakes of the past, including a thoughtful assessment of the history of 20th century state socialism in Eastern Europe. That's it. If you like the idea of such outcomes, then come along for an exploration of how we might change things. If you're dubious because you don't understand why capitalism as an economic system is uniquely bad for women, and if you doubt that there could ever be anything good about socialism, this short treatise will provide some illumination. If you don't give a whit about women's lives because you're a gynophobic right-wing internet troll, save your money and go back to your parents' basement right now. This isn't the book for you. Of course, some might argue that unregulated capitalism sucks for almost everyone, but I want to focus on how capitalism disproportionately harms women. Competitive labor markets discriminate against those whose reproductive biology makes them primarily responsible for childbearing. Today, this means humans who get pink hats in the hospital and the letter F next to the name on their birth certificate, as if we've already failed by not coming into the world as a boy. Competitive labor markets also devalue those expected to be the primary caregivers of children. Although societal attitudes have evolved in this regard, our idealization of motherhood means that most of us still believe that baby needs mama, a whole lot more than papa, at least until the child is old enough to play sports. Others will argue that unregulated capitalism is not bad for all women. Yes, for those women lucky enough to sit at the top of the income distribution, the system works pretty well. Although women at the executive level still face gender pay gaps and remain underrepresented in leadership positions, on the whole, things aren't too shabby for the Sheryl Sandbergs of the world. Of course, sexual harassment still hinders progress, even for those at the top, and too many women believe that if you want to run with the big dogs, you may have to suck it up and ignore the groping and unwanted advances. And race plays an important role as well. White women do a lot better in aggregate than do women of color. But when we look at society as a whole, on average, women are comparatively worse off in countries where markets are less encumbered by regulation, taxation, and public enterprises than they are in nations where state revenues support greater levels of redistribution and larger social safety nets. Choose your data source, and you find the same story. Unemployment and poverty plague women with children. Employers discriminate against women without children because they might have them in the future. In the United States in 2013, women over the age of 65 suffered from poverty at much greater rates than men and dominated those in the category of extreme poverty. Globally, women face higher rates of economic deprivation. Women are often the last to be hired and the first to be fired in cyclical downturns. And when they do find employment, bosses pay them less than men. When states need to slash government spending on education, health care, or old age pensions, mothers, daughters, sisters, and wives must pick up the slack, diverting their energy to care for the young, the sick, and the elderly. Capitalism thrives on women's unpaid labor in the home because women's care work supports lower taxes. Lower taxes mean higher profits for those already at the top of the income ladder, mostly men. But capitalism was not always so savage. Throughout much of the 20th century, state socialism presented an existential challenge to the worst excesses of the free market. The threat posed by Marxist ideologies forced Western governments to expand social safety nets to protect workers from the unpredictable but inevitable booms and busts of the capitalist economy. After the Berlin Wall fell, many celebrated the triumph of the West, consigning socialist ideas to the dustbin of history. But for all its faults, state socialism provided an important foil for capitalism. It was in response to a global discourse of social and economic rights, a discourse that appealed not only to the progressive populations of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, but also to many men and women in Europe and Western Europe and North America, that politicians agreed to improve working conditions for wage laborers, as well as to create social programs for children, the poor, the elderly, the sick, and the disabled, mitigating exploitation and the growth of income inequality. Although there were important antecedents in the 1980s, once state socialism collapsed, capitalism shook off the constraints of market regulation and income redistribution. Without the looming threat of a rival superpower, the last 30 years of global neoliberalism have witnessed a rapid shriveling of social programs that protect citizens from cyclical instability and financial crises, and reduce the vast inequality of economic outcomes between those at the top and those at the bottom of the income distribution. For much of the 20th century, Western capitalist countries also endeavored to outdo the East European countries in terms of women's rights, fueling progressive social change. For example, the state socialists in the USSR and Eastern Europe were so successful at giving women economic opportunities outside the home that initially, for the 2 decades after the end of World War II, women's wage work was conflated with the evils of communism. The American way of life meant male breadwinners and female homemakers. But slowly, socialist championing of women's emancipation began to chip away at the Leave It to Beaver ideal. The Soviet launch of Sputnik in 1957 spurred American leaders to rethink the costs of maintaining traditional gender roles. They feared the state socialists enjoyed an advantage in technological development, and why women have better sex under socialism.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the second hour of the program. On the line with us is our old friend, Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, the co-founder of democracyatwork.info, the author of numerous books, including his most recent, The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself, also available as an ebook, democracyatwork.info, Prof. Wolff with 2 Fs on Twitter. Professor Wolff, welcome back. I had 2 questions for you today, and they're quite separate. Although maybe you can scramble them together. But number one, we're experiencing these massive heat waves, which are driving up our use of energy, which is, I would think, hurting our economy because spending more for air conditioning means less disposable income. And the Fed is talking about, and we haven't heard yet what they're going to do, but they're talking about probably somewhere between a half and a full point increase in the Fed fund rate, in the interest rates. What do these things do to our economy? What can we expect as a consequence of these 2 events?
Well, the first thing, and probably the biggest one, is this phenomena of climate change. The fires everywhere, the drought, the heat that is record-breaking literally around the world. This is what the climate scientists told us we would have if we did not, as a people, as a planet, deal with these problems of global warming. And now we have them. And they are a testimony to a fundamental irrationality of our economic system. Competition incentivizes every capitalist to grow. You're more successful, you're safer, your future is more secure. The bigger you are, the more profits you can generate, etc. So the self-protective incentive of capitalism is to make every enterprise grow. But if every enterprise grows, then we suck up more resources. We don't have the time to question whether it is or isn't in the interest of the society as a whole, of the history we're trying to live, that everybody's doing this sort of crazy growth without reference to the planet that we live on. And now we're seeing the results of it. What we see particularly now is terrible, terrible inefficiency. It's like making a mockery of the claims of capitalism that it's an efficient system. When you have heat like this, the land is affected in very bad ways. People's productivity goes down. Their health is impaired. Their social connections are weakened. I mean, I could go on. We are pulling out more fossil fuels and burning them to generate the electricity that runs the air conditioning caused by the very same process of burning fossil fuels. I mean, the irrationality of our system is never more starkly present than in this. And by the way, it also means disruptions. The heat closes a railway station, buckles a bridge, prevents a factory from opening because the air conditioning isn't adequate. This adds to the so-called supply chain disruptions. And that is a contributor, among many other things, to the very inflation that we're worried about. All these things are interconnected. This is a very damaging, economically inefficient system that functions in this way. And this inflation now, here's the connection to your other topic, the inflation is now so dangerous, so disruptive of our society, so unjust in the fact that the people hurt most by rising prices are those amongst us with middle and low incomes who can't afford to pay them. So the Federal Reserve is going to do what? Later today, announce, as you said, a rising interest rate, which is going to make it more difficult for everybody to borrow money. And again, who does that hurt the most? Those with the least, who can't afford a higher mortgage loan or a higher car loan or to pay more on their monthly credit card bills, etc. So you're seeing a system lurching from pillar to post. It is a very sad as well as upsetting spectacle.
Yeah, I guess so. What do you expect an immediate consequence of a Fed rate hike? I know that mortgage rates right now are over 5% typically, which, if I'm recalling correctly, is about twice what they were a year ago.
Right.
This has to be cooling off the housing market. What does that do to the average American?
It's already cooling off the housing market. It's going to make selling automobiles more difficult. General Motors is in trouble already. The stocks are going down. Walmart yesterday announced that it is guiding people that its profits are going to be lower for the year 2022 than they had originally hoped or projected. Everywhere you're seeing slowing down. The inflation means people cannot buy what they were able to afford before. Their money runs out sooner because everything costs more than it used to. And therefore, the crunch is coming. We know that we're in for a recession. A lot of the language makes it iffy. There is no iffy. The only debate is how bad will it be? How long will it last? What will be the ultimate cause? What steps might the government have to take beyond what it's doing? There, we don't know those answers. That's about the future. But, we really have done a number, if you allow me, Tom.
Go for it.
For the last 30 years, we have redistributed wealth in America. Everybody knows that. Left, right, and center economists, we all know we have moved wealth and income from the bottom and the middle to the top. Okay, 30 to 40 years of that are shaking and ripping this society apart. But it's nothing compared to the last 4. We have hit our working class with a pandemic, killed over 1 million of them, then an economic crash, second only to the Great Depression of the 30s, then an inflation, and now a recession. You cannot do that to the mass of your people, especially while you're savaging the ecological life of this planet, and not cause the kinds of social disruption that I see coming and for which this country has not prepared itself.
Yeah. Now, I believe it was the IMF, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm running off a headline I read in the Financial Times over the weekend, that warned of a worldwide recession that could be consequential.
Yes.
Speak to that, please.
They did. They announced that they are doing two things of importance. Immediately, they are reducing the projections for economic growth in the whole world economy. They do that as a regular course. They look at the different rates of growth in the different continents and so on. So they're ratcheting down global economic growth way below what it originally was as recently as a few months ago. That's how fast this inflation and all these accumulated problems are impacting the economy. And in addition, they did the math. If you reduce growth, and you have the kind of inequality we have in the world, what you have to see is that we're going to be moving, get ready now, hundreds of millions of people back down into the unspeakable level of poverty that we thought we had escaped as little as 2, 3, 4 years ago. That's how serious all of this is, and there is no end in sight. This is an unstable economy. That's why we have inflation one year, recession the next year, and again, nothing approaching the kind of debate or discussion in our society whether a system that works like this, even if you can fix it each time it breaks down, whether we really haven't come to that moment like you have sometimes with a very old refrigerator, when the repairman or woman stands up with you and says, look, I can fix it, but you'll have me back in 2 or 3 weeks and another $300 bill. The time has come to change the system.
Amen. Well, let's talk about that in a future conversation. It's a great setup. Professor Richard Wolff, thanks so much for dropping by.
My pleasure, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you. It's 15 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls. How is the... they're coming after our health care again. I have to tell you about this. This is a breathtaking story. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
The Texas abortion ban architect now wants to take down health care for pregnant women. Right. I'll tell you about that in just a second. And welcome back. Jeremy in Riverside, California. Hey, Jeremy, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I wanted to just clear up a couple of myths about desalination that I heard one of your callers make. I did something for a school project a few years ago, and I was thinking it was a great idea until I started looking into it, but it's not sustainable at all. If you think about the absurdity, considering the alternatives of recycling, especially, the absurdity of dumping water that you could recycle into the ocean and then having to pump it back uphill using massive amounts of energy just to filter it anyway, when you could have filtered it in the first place, it really is absurd. And then you consider the plankton. We have one of the most biologically productive coasts in the world, so you're really kind of sucking in a lot of sea life as well and impacting that. So that's another thing that the Coastal Commission rejected it for, and I'm glad that they did. Okay. So I would really urge.
So your solution, Jeremy, rather than pulling water out of the ocean and processing it, is to recycle the existing wastewater, which makes a lot of sense. There are, however, inefficiencies in the system. I mean, you're going to have a certain amount of water that evaporates. You're going to have a certain amount of water that is just going to end up as wastewater, which means that you're going to have a constant replenishment of your raw, original water supply. And if the Colorado River dries up and the glaciers in the mountains in California vanish, and they are pretty much there now, pretty much vanished, where are you going to get the water from?
So we have basically a system right here in Orange County that recycles 150 million gallons a day, which has been lauded by the EPA for one of the most state-of-the-art systems in the world.
Right.
So how about absolutely. And then they're expanding it. So any good CBA, any good cost benefit analysis is going to consider such alternatives. And so when you really look at it at a fine level, it's not sustainable at all, especially, as I said, compared to recycling. And it's also really expensive. And also the site in Huntington Beach there was a Superfund site. There's all kinds of pollution that's going on because of the construction of that plant. The other problem with that one is they're locating it with a power plant so that they can use that as an excuse to keep that power plant in operation and make people dependent on the water. And it's really ugly. I would really urge people to look into
they're co-locating it with an old nuclear plant?
No, it's a traditional, I believe they use gas.
Yeah. But they still use water for cooling, don't they? Yeah. There's a lot of waste heat.
Yeah, and that's why they put it there on the coast, of course, so they can pump in that water as well. So, if we had more recycling, that would just make.
Is Orange County pretty much the only place where such high quality, high efficiency recycling of water is being done, or is that happening up and down the coast in California? I haven't seen any evidence of it here in Oregon.
I'm not sure about Oregon. I'm a California boy. There's a couple of them. It's one of the only ones I think there's just a few actually throughout the United States. Mm-hmm. And it's relatively new, but I would really urge you to look into it, because if you compare the two, there's no way that you would go with desalination, especially in this geography. We have a very unique coast that, we have to protect certain resources because it's one of the few sites in the world that produce a vast majority of sea life.
Yeah, I get it. Jeremy, thanks. Thanks for the information. I appreciate it. Good talking with you. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Well, they're at it again. Take away abortion rights from women, the good Republican fathers of Texas. And now they want to gut what's left of the Affordable Care Act. Because people are just getting too much preventative health care. Specifically, what they're actually going after specifically is human papillomavirus, HPV, which causes genital warts, which produces cervical cancer in women, and other kinds of cancer as well. It also causes throat cancer. But the most deadly is the cervical cancer. And HIV. They want to go after HIV prevention and HPV prevention. Why? Well, if you think about it in terms of, science and math and even economics, preventing diseases that are expensive to treat is a whole lot cheaper than treating the diseases. If you can prevent women from having HPV through screening and through vaccination, if you can prevent people from getting HIV, there's a whole selection of options right now that work to prevent or reduce HIV infection rates. Then your treatment, which can be very, very expensive on the back end, doesn't come into play. You save money. Preventative care almost always saves money. And in the case of HIV and HPV, it saves an enormous amounts of money in addition to saving lives. So why are Republicans in Texas opposed to it? Why do they want to gut the provisions of the Affordable Care Act specifically? And they're arguing this in a court in Texas right now. And if they prevail, and they may well, because the judge that they are before is a judge that has ruled against the Affordable Care Act on multiple occasions in the past. And if they prevail, his name is Reed O'Connor, and this is the Northern District of Texas, U.S. District Court for the Northern District. If they prevail, then, of course, it'll get appealed, and it'll go to the Fifth Circuit, which is another right-wing wackadoodle court. And if they prevail in the Fifth Circuit at knocking down these parts of Obamacare, then, people will appeal it to the Supreme Court, and there we've got 6 whack jobs on the Supreme Court. And so back to my question, why are these Texas Republicans opposed to Obamacare paying for STD treatments or STD screenings and preventative treatments for HIV and HPV? The answer, it turns out, is quite simple. Those are diseases you get from having sex. And they don't want anybody to have sex unless they're married. It's just that simple. I mean, this is Puritanism 101. This is, according to the lawsuit, quote, the government cannot possibly show that forcing private insurers to provide PrEP drugs, the HPV vaccine, and screenings and behavioral counseling for STD and drug use free of charge is a policy of such overriding importance that it can trump religious freedom objections. This is a quote from their lawsuit. They're saying that their religion teaches that people should not have sex outside of marriage. And sex outside of marriage is the principal way that you get HPV and HIV. And of course, HIV, the association with gay people is, also on their radar screen. These people are bigots and homophobes. And so they're saying that their religion says that you're not supposed to have sex outside of marriage, and therefore, according to their religion, we the people collectively, through our tax dollars that go to fund the Affordable Care Act, we should not be paying to help people who are having sex outside of marriage prevent the diseases that can be the consequence of that. This is all predicated on this bizarre notion that if you just punish people hard enough, if you just condemn them to horrible deaths or expensive, excruciating lifelong treatments, that's going to change their behavior so they'll behave like good Christians. And in fact, it doesn't. The urge to procreate is built into us. It is an instinct that is far stronger than the religious impulse. You're not going to stop people from having sex by punishing them with disease. But these guys, they're convinced that they can do it. The Biden administration right now is arguing in court that the people making the lawsuit don't have standing. They want the lawsuit thrown out. They're saying that they don't have standing because none of these people have had or been harmed by anybody getting preventative care. Now, I'm guessing that the argument that they're making and will continue to make is that, yes, we are being harmed because you're violating our religious convictions by forcing us to pay taxes to fund this, that the harm is the tax payments. And, that's the argument that got John Roberts and 4 other right-wing crazies on the Supreme Court to go along with gutting the Medicaid expansion in Obamacare, in part. That was part of the argument. So, I'm giving you advance warning here. This is early public notice. This is going to take probably a year to work its way through the courts. And given the current structure of our court system, given that Donald Trump got over 300 right-wing cranks on the federal bench and put 3 hardcore right-wing cranks on the Supreme Court, get ready. This is, the Republicans, 16 times? No, over 40 times voted in the House of Representatives to end Obamacare. They're still working at it. This new strategy is just chip away, chip away, chip away, chip away until there's nothing left. It's the same strategy they used to end abortion over the last 30 years. It's the same strategy that they used to introduce guns throughout our society over the last 30 and 40 years. So keep an eye on this one. We'll be back with your calls right after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. For the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading Locked Down, Locked Out, Why Prison Doesn't Work and How We Can Do Better by Maya Chenwar, who is, or was, I believe she still is, the publisher, or the editor, rather, over at truthout.org. This is from the introduction, the very beginning of the book. She uses a word I can't say on the air. I'll replace it with the word damn. Damn, 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 damn. I'm crying with my mother over the phone. It's late evening, December 25th, 2012, and Kayla, my only sister and best friend, has been arrested for the 7th time in the past 6 years. She's in jail again, and this time we're sort of hoping she'll stay there. If she asks, I tell Mom, I'm not bailing her out. Well, you know, we're not, Mom says, her voice low and far away, a weary echo of words uttered in months and years past. If she's in there, at least she'll be safe. Jail, we agree, may be the only place that can save Kayla's life, staving off her burning dependency on heroin. Neither of us acknowledges that regardless of whether Kayla stays clean while incarcerated, sooner or later she'll be getting out. Do we know what she's in for, I asked Mom. Does it matter? I think of Kayla cuffed and listless, being dragged through the doors of the Cook County Jail, catching the eyes of women she's known before in court, on the street, in juvenile detention, in jail, in prison. I wonder whether a part of her is relieved to be back. Later, when I pick up the phone and hear a robotic voice announce, you have a collect call from the Cook County Jail, press 5 to take the call, I press the hang-up button and get into bed. My attitude toward Kayla's incarceration was born out of desperation. She'd overdosed 3 times within 2 months, passing out on the street, awakening in abandoned buildings or crowded hospitals, her pulse barely ticking. Yet my wish chafed against not only my love for her, but also my politics, my ideals, my sense of justice and truth. After all, I run a social justice-based news organization and have denounced the colossus that is the prison industrial complex for as long as I can remember. For nearly a decade, I've corresponded with a number of people in prison as both interviewees and pen pals, and I've learned much from them about the violence and hopelessness of our system. My understandings of the power structures that create prisons have been guided by the work of people like activist and scholar Angela Davis, a staunch prison abolitionist. How could I reconcile my wholehearted opposition to the prison industrial complex with a desire to see my own sister locked up? When I look back on that time, I can only comprehend it by acknowledging the insidious, persistent role that prison occupied in my mind. It was closely connected to the role it occupies in larger society. Incarceration serves as the default answer to many of the worst social problems plaguing this country. Not because it solves them, but because it buries them. By isolating and disappearing millions of Americans, more than 2.3 million right now, making us the most incarcerated country on the planet, prison conveniently disappears deeply rooted issues that society, or rather those with power in society, would rather not attend to. Prison, writes Angela Davis, performs a feat of magic. As massive numbers of homeless, hungry, unemployed, drug-addicted, illiterate, and mentally ill people vanish behind its walls, the social problems of extreme poverty, homelessness, hunger, unemployment, drug addiction, illiteracy, and mental illness become more ignorable, too. But, as Davis notes, prisons do not disappear problems, they disappear human beings. And the caging and erasure of those human beings, mostly people of color and poor people, perpetuates a cycle in which large groups of people are cut off from mainstream society and denied the freedoms, opportunities, civil dignity, and basic needs that allow them a good life. In many jails and prisons, incarcerated people are tossed into a dank, dungeon-like solitary confinement cell when they are determined to have misbehaved. It's dubbed the hole. Isolated and dark, it shuts out almost all communication with fellow prisoners in the outside. Guards control the terms of confinement and the channels, if any, by which words can travel in and out. The hole presents a stark symbol of the institution of prison in its entirety, which functions on the tenets of disappearance, isolationism, and disposability. The solution to our social problems, the mechanism that's supposed to keep things together, amounts to destruction, the disposal of vast numbers of human beings, the breaking down of families, and the shattering of communities. Prison is tearing society apart. This country's most marginalized communities bear the overwhelming brunt of that devastation, but ultimately we are all caught up in the destruction as the politics of isolation ruptures the human bonds that could otherwise hold together a safer, healthier, and more just society. The behemoth that encompasses the prison is called by many names. The most meaningful ones, I think, are those that convey the pervasiveness of its power, the way it infects the world outside as well as the people within.
Scholar and activist Beth Ritchie uses the term prison nation, describing it as, quote, a broad notion of using the arm of the law to control people, especially people who are disadvantaged and come from disadvantaged communities, end quote. That control can take the form of prisons, jails, surveillance, policing, detention, probation, harsh restrictions on child guardianship, the militarization of schools, and other strategies of isolation and disposal, particularly deployed against poor communities of color, especially black communities. Others have used prison nation simply to demonstrate the system's vastness, how it infiltrates our culture and fuels our national politics, often in invisible ways. Prison industrial complex, PIC, is another key term. Rachel Herzing of the prison abolitionist group Critical Resistance defines it, and then she goes on through this. It's an extraordinary book, Locked Down, Locked Out by Maya Shen.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Welcome back to 34 minutes past the hour, picking up your phone calls here. Charles in Miami. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind today?
Hello, how you doing, Tom?
Good. What's up?
We need to talk. First of all, I think you were sort of letting Donald Trump off the hook in the very beginning, where you were saying probably he doesn't know the laws, and you were just mentioning.
No, I said he doesn't. I don't think he's ever read the Constitution. But keep going.
But here, I mean, to me, over the years listening to you guys, MSNBC, I've learned that he's learned to skirt a lot of litigation just by delay.
Yeah.
So for him to want to speed things up now on everybody else just makes me feel like these people are so privileged. And they feel like they can get away with just anything. It's ridiculous.
Well, I didn't say that to cut him slack, Charles. I said that as an indictment, that, you know, it's a crime that we'd have a president who's never read the Constitution.
Exactly. But, you know, to me, it's like he's gotten away with that because the Republican Party has given him this pass, along with the corporate media. And I don't think we challenge it enough. I don't think there's enough pushback on us that says, you know, forget about the ignorance. Because if he wants to hold such power, if he wants to be, you know, he wants to be the head of the government of the best country, I think, in the world, he should be more versed. He should be more educated.
Yeah.
He should be more versed in our laws.
I agree.
Our norms, you know, in our different institutions. And there's another thing I wanted to tell you. Now, I think they're trying to do to Mark Meadows what they did to Michael Cohen. The other day I heard on the news a couple weeks ago that they was investigating Mark Meadows, and I just felt like when I heard this, it just brought Michael Cohen back to me, and I was like, they're trying to make Donald Trump skirt again by giving him a patsy. And I'm wondering, when Donald Trump donated that $1 million to Meadows, was that the tip? Was that the payoff that he would take?
Obviously. Yeah. You know, and the fact that Trump gave Mark Meadows $1 million has, to the best of my knowledge, almost never been mentioned in any media stories about why Mark Meadows won't testify before Congress. Seems to me like the two go together.
Right, and I got one more thing. This is the last thing. We've talked about this in the past, and I'm changing gears with you. And I just want to remind you because it's happened in my neck of the woods. And it's coming to you sooner or later. But with this gentrification that's going on in our cities, in these Democratic strongholds, I told you, people in my community that can't find work in these type of projects, they're going to, you know, if you can't find work, you can't pay your bills, you can't pay your mortgage. You end up losing your property, and these same developers pick it up, and you can't rent from them.
Right.
And then the worst part is, another thing that's under the radar is this corporate media has allowed corporations to frack and poison our waters and poison our air. And you have, I think, a lot of people being displaced from these smaller communities, and they ending up in a big city like I am in Miami. And guess what? They're getting the better jobs. They're moving into these gentrified neighborhoods, and the Democrats. You're not going to have a stronghold anymore. Last year, the first years that the Democrats did not win Miami-Dade County, although there was proven evidence that there was bags and bags of votes that wasn't counted. They had it on camera. You know.
Right.
So I'm just trying to say this is a plot to displace us, displace our vote, and it's not being covered. It's not being understood at the length of how far they're going, how much they're plotting and planning to upend our democracy.
And they're doing it all to make a buck. I mean, I saw this, firsthand when we lived in Washington, D.C. We lived in a neighborhood that was being gentrified. And, it was the exact same process. And the thing that was driving it was the millions and millions of dollars in profits that the developers would make and the money that they were handing off to politicians to get where they got. And, I think the trampling on mostly on black people in D.C. was the case, and I'm guessing the same in Miami, Charles, was sort of an added benefit for them. I don't think it was their principal motivation. Their principal motivation was to basically steal property from black people and sell it to wealthier white people, which is kind of the definition of gentrification in America these days. But
like I said, with the climate change, the climate disasters that's happening in our country, they are displacing people. People are moving to bigger cities. And like I said, if it was once a Democratic stronghold, it may not be, because you also had brought up a point last year that how the Hispanic community was being bombarded by this conservative media, this conservative radio. And it all comes together, Tom.
Yep.
This isn't just happening in a vacuum.
No, and there's more Hispanics in the United States than there are African Americans, and that's why the GOP and people aligned with the GOP, right-wing billionaires aligned with the GOP, have put up, several hundred right-wing Spanish language stations. They're, and they're appealing to them based on their Catholicism, using abortion as a lever, and basically on racism in the Hispanic community, anti-black racism in the Hispanic community, which is a very real thing too. Charles, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Excellent points all. Dave in Hoffman Estates, Illinois. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Do you remember shortly after Trump got in office, and he was over in the Philippines, and they might have been, celebrating Duterte's, election and whatnot, and Duterte kind of jokingly said, Donald Trump, that's something about president for life.
Mm-hmm.
And
Trump loved
Trump goes something like, I like the sound of that.
Yeah, exactly.
And I was reading where, because he's always made no bones about it, that he's floated the idea about serving as a president for life, and kept saying about the rig system and all of this stuff, and said at the time, we don't have the right people in there yet. Says we've got a lot of great people, but certain things we don't have the right people. But hey, Tom, before I go, I got a book you might find very interesting to read. I don't know if you've read it or not. I ended up getting it on Amazon. It's World War II Conscientious Objectors. Germfast, Michigan, the Alcatraz camp. The author is Jane Kopecki.
Huh. No, I'm unfamiliar with it. Thanks for the tip.
It's quite the history on it. How they were treated worse than third-class citizens. They were considered cowards because they wouldn't go in, and given all kinds of dirty jobs and whatnot. And that we had imprisoned COs for 13 months, and I guess there was like 151 camps throughout the U.S., but this one was up in the eastern end of the UP. It was kind of like in the middle of nowhere.
Wow. That's a story that is largely untold, Dave.
Yeah, that's why it's an excellent book if you can get a hold of it. I think there's a lot of history in it.
I'll take a look.
A lot of these guys that they put in had a much higher IQs than the guards.
Yeah, well, most of your conscientious objectors were coming from, academia or from a religious perspective, basically. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Dave, thank you for that.
The name, though, is Jane Kopecki. I think you'd find it highly interesting.
I'll check it out. Dave, thank you. John in Apple Valley, California. You are on the air, John. What's up?
Well, I just wanted to make a quick comment about your discussion of electric cars. Got my income tax return. My wife and I tried to buy a Chevy Bolt and couldn't do it. One of them said right up front they're in transit. The other one had a salesman go back and forth with me to get what exactly I wanted, and then he said the same thing in transit. So it's not as easy as it sounds. That's all I wanted to say.
I see. In other words, your point is there's just no inventory. This is because of the chip shortage, I'm assuming.
I don't know.
Yeah.
All I know is it's not there. It's not there.
Well, good luck, John. I hope it gets from in transit to in your driveway soon, because they're great fun. Thanks a lot for the call. Laura in Las Vegas. Hey, Laura, what's up?
Hi. Thank you for taking my call. I just wanted to mention that there is a desalination plant already in California, in Carlsbad, that's been up and running since 2015.
Mm-hmm.
So we have that going already. And according to their website, it says desalinated water costs half a penny per gallon. So it's not that expensive. And the latest request for a desalination plant, though, that was shot down was because of the I guess, hurting animals or
right.
whatever.
Yeah, the impact on the
Hopefully,
local environment. Yeah.
Right. Hopefully they'll take care of that. If they can do it in Carlsbad, I don't see why they can't do it anyplace else in California. Also, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it'd be interesting to compare them, to see how it works. I frankly admit I'm not well versed on this. So.
Uh-huh. And also, there's a lot of talk now about diverting water from the Mississippi River over to Lake Mead. So, of course,
that would be a hell of a project. That's got to be what, 800 miles?
It's a long way. It's a long way, and it sounds like it would be expensive. But so is running out of water.
Yeah.
I mean, we have they recycle the water here in Las Vegas, and they do a pretty good job of it. But if Lake Mead goes completely dry, we're screwed. So
yeah, I'm getting it, and Lake Mead is vanishing. I mean, the time lapse pictures over the last couple of years are just shocking. Laura, thank you for the call. Thank you so much.
Okay.
It's great to hear from you. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Defending America from the weapons of mass deception. We'll be right back with more of your calls in just a second. And welcome back. Mark in San Jose. Hey, Mark, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's on your mind today?
Well, I know I think we should that we should admit that we should I know you talked about that the Democratic Party didn't want to talk about stolen elections, but I think it's time we do that.
I agree. So you have a specific here, Mark?
Yeah. Well, I think we should mention, that's what I tell all my right-wing friends. I say, hey, yeah, I agree with you. Elections are stolen. And I think if the Democratic Party did that, that would be a good idea. Say, yes, we agree. Elections are stolen, but not by voters.
Yeah, I look at, the way that Jeb Bush, knocked 90,000 African Americans off the voting rolls just in time for his brother's election. Or, what Ken Blackwell was doing the same thing. He was caging a couple 100,000 people in Ohio just before the 2004 election. Right. Those are really worthy of a serious investigation. Mark, thank you. Thanks for bringing it up. Susan in Caldwell, Idaho. Hey, Susan, thank you for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Hey, I love your show.
Thank you.
Just speaking back to the meat industry in our country, I'd like to remind everybody that 20 years ago, the Harper's Index, which gives interesting information about the world in that magazine, pointed out that 25% of our meat slaughter goes into pet food. And remember, cats are obligated carnivores. You can't feed a cat a vegan diet.
That's correct.
So I'd like to point out that there's this great book out by a Brit called Rob Percival called The Meat Paradox, Eating, Empathy, and the Future of Meat in the World. And it makes a case for what they're now calling regenerative farming, which is the old way of farming. Letting fields go fallow, moving hoof stock onto and off of fields that would produce enough meat for people and also our animals. It's a fascinating book. If you want to read human anthropology in an interesting format, I really recommend this
What's
book.
the title again?
Rob Percival, The Meat Paradox, Eating, Empathy, and the Future of Meat. Just came out in March.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And I'd also like to point out about our poor person who couldn't get his electric car. One of my doctors just got her Rivian pickup delivered 6 months early. Made in America, all electric pickup.
Whoa!
He loves it.
Is that the new Chevy?
No, the Rivian. It's that new startup in Illinois.
Oh yeah.
The Rivian.
So they're shipping cars.
Yes, it was delivered 6 months early to her. Has a 320-mile range. She's taken it up into the mountains already. Can't talk enough about it.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, my little Nissan wanted to park next to your big truck. It looks so cute together.
The Rivians. That company, I remember when the press release came out like 6 months ago or so, maybe a little before that, I talked about it on this program. Hey, look out, this is coming. I haven't heard a peep out of them since then. They need a publicist, a good publicity department.
Oh, yeah. She just got a call. Your car's in Salt Lake City. We're going to send it over to Boise right now.
Wow.
And she is so enthused.
Yeah, I get
it. And it looks great.
I get it. Susan, thank you for the call. It's nice to hear from you and good information, and I'll look for the meat paradox. We'll be right back. It's, just about 10 minutes before the hour. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Welcome back. Picking up your calls. Sam in Annapolis, Illinois. Hey, Sam, what's up?
I want to talk about the Supreme Court.
Okay, go for it.
It's my belief that the Supreme Court is no longer an independent institution. It's now a political institution, and anybody in politics runs for a specific term. And I'm in favor of the existing 9, 3-draw 2 years, 3-draw 4 years, 3-draw 6 years, and they have 6-year terms, and they can't repeat.
Yeah, I think term limiting the Supreme Court is a really good idea, and I agree with your analysis, Sam. I would argue, though, I would take a step beyond that and argue that the Supreme Court has always been a political body. It is two-step politics. It's subordinate to the politics of the presidency and the U.S. Senate. But I don't think that there's ever been a time in our history. Probably the beginning point was in the months before, in early 1800, after John Adams lost the election to Thomas Jefferson in November of 1799, and then Jefferson took office in March of 1800. During that little 3 or 4 month window there, John Adams, as just specifically to piss off Thomas Jefferson, put Jefferson's second cousin, John Marshall, on the court, and John Marshall was Jefferson's most hated enemy. And then Marshall went on 3 years later to claim for the Supreme Court in the Marbury versus Madison decision, again, a decision that involved Jefferson, to claim that the Supreme Court could strike down laws. And, of course, Jefferson went nuts, and the court didn't do it again until the 1860s. But I would argue that not only is your analysis right, but that it doesn't go far enough, that the Supreme Court has always been a political body. Sam, thanks for the call. Yvette in El Sobrante, California. Hey, Yvette, what's on your mind today?
So I was wondering, I haven't seen really anything about the money that was behind sending all those people to Washington.
I'm sorry, Yvette, your phone is breaking up so badly I can't understand what you're saying. I'm going to put you on hold. Joyce, Yvette is on line 5. If you guys can work that out, and I'll put her back on the air. Mark in Valley, Washington. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Well, Tom, let me start off by saying that I do believe in God, but I am sick of religion, all right?
Yeah, I'm with you on both points.
Okay, I mean, these people are not happy just being able to do their own thing.
Are you talking about the Texas guys who want to blow up the Affordable Care Act, preventative health care stuff because they're religion?
I'm talking about the Catholics with abortion, the evangelicals with.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the whole thing.
Yeah, got it.
They're just not happy doing their thing. They want me to have to do their thing.
Yep.
Okay? Where's my right not to have to succumb to their beliefs?
Well, in their mind, your right doesn't exist. That God is running everything, and they're the ones who know what God wants.
Well, I'm sorry, but there's more than one interpretation of what God is and what God wants out there, especially in this country.
And in the last 5,000 years of recorded history, there have been at least 3,000 gods identified by different cultures.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, it's not like these people have a line onto what's correct and known to be factually correct. These are their beliefs, all right? I have my own beliefs, and my beliefs don't coincide with their beliefs. So why should they have the right to force me to have to accept their way of thinking?
Well, this was during the founding generation, this was a big deal because Massachusetts had been basically running as a theocracy for 100 years. And they almost didn't allow Massachusetts into the Union because of that. And they explicitly wrote into both the Constitution, the body of the Constitution itself, and into the First Amendment, you know, what James Madison referred to as a wall of separation between church and state. And then Madison doubled down on that when he became president in 1809. His first official veto was vetoing a bill that would have given money to churches in D.C. to provide poorhouses for the poor, you know, to provide housing and food for the poor. And he said, we can't do this because it'll establish a precedent. He called it a legal agency, which was how they referred to the word precedent back then. He said it would establish a precedent of government giving money to churches. Madison was afraid, and Madison was a Christian, by the way. Madison was afraid that if government started funding churches, it would corrupt churches to the point that his beloved Christian religion would become, you know, disgustingly corrupt. Jefferson was afraid that if people from the church, that is to say, you know, ministers and priests, ever got to elected office on a religious platform, that they would corrupt our government in a way that would damage the government of the United States. He wasn't so worried about corrupting the churches. Jefferson was not a Christian. But they were both right, it turns out. And I would say they probably both would have agreed with you, Mark. Mark, thank you for the call. Yvette in El Sobranto, you want to try, or El Sobranto, you want to try it again, Yvette?
Yeah. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, it sounds fine now. What's up?
So I had a question. I haven't heard very much or very little about the money that was behind all the people that were bussed into Washington on January 6th. Do you know any more about that?
There was a women's group that Jenny Thomas is involved with that put up, I believe, several $100,000 of that, and there was another group that was being run by a guy who was in Trump's orbit who put up a lot of the money. But yeah, I think that's an issue that really is worthy of examination. Their claim to innocence, though, is that, you know, we thought it was just going to be a rally for Donald Trump. We had no idea they were going to go to the Capitol and try to kill a vice president.
Yeah, right.
Right. Well, so that's their argument. And I think it's possible. You know, I mean, Trump modified his speech to say, let's go to the Capitol. That wasn't part of the speech that Stephen Miller had written for him. And so, you know, I think the thing that's going to nail Trump in this is that everybody around him thought that was a bad idea. Nobody around him wanted that to happen. It happened at the last minute as a result of you know, I think Trump had planned it for quite some time, frankly. I think he had planned it with leaders of several of the militia groups and with Roger Stone. I think this is a plan that Roger Stone planned on putting into place in 2016, in fact, the so-called Stop the Steal. He even had a website, stopthesteal.something or other, from 2016. So I think this was a conspiracy. But I'm not sure that the Jenny Thomases of the world, you know, the people who funded the buses were in on the conspiracy. But Jenny Thomas certainly later on was really pushing this thing. Yvette, thank you for the call. Spot on. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. In
addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, We also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We take life back.
For the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading Locked Down, Locked Out, Why Prison Doesn't Work and How We Can Do Better by Maya Schenwar, who is, or was, I believe she still is, the publisher, or the editor, rather, over at truthout.org. This is from the introduction, the very beginning of the book. She uses a word I can't say on the air. I'll replace it with the word damn. Damn, 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 damn. I'm crying with my mother over the phone. It's late evening, December 25th, 2012, and Kayla, my only sister and best friend, has been arrested for the 7th time in the past 6 years. She's in jail again, and this time we're sort of hoping she'll stay there. If she asks, I tell Mom, I'm not bailing her out. Well, you know, we're not, Mom says, her voice low and far away, a weary echo of words uttered in months and years past. If she's in there, at least she'll be safe. Jail, we agree, may be the only place that can save Kayla's life, staving off her burning dependency on heroin. Neither of us acknowledges that regardless of whether Kayla stays clean while incarcerated, sooner or later she'll be getting out. Do we know what she's in for, I asked Mom. Does it matter? I think of Kayla cuffed and listless, being dragged through the doors of the Cook County Jail, catching the eyes of women she's known before in court, on the street, in juvenile detention, in jail, in prison. I wonder whether a part of her is relieved to be back. Later, when I pick up the phone and hear a robotic voice announce, you have a collect call from the Cook County Jail, press 5 to take the call, I press the hang-up button and get into bed. My attitude toward Kayla's incarceration was born out of desperation. She'd overdosed 3 times within 2 months, passing out on the street, awakening in abandoned buildings or crowded hospitals, her pulse barely ticking. Yet my wish chafed against not only my love for her, but also my politics, my ideals, my sense of justice and truth. After all, I run a social justice-based news organization and have denounced the colossus that is the prison industrial complex for as long as I can remember. For nearly a decade, I've corresponded with a number of people in prison as both interviewees and pen pals, and I've learned much from them about the violence and hopelessness of our system. My understandings of the power structures that create prisons have been guided by the work of people like activist and scholar Angela Davis, a staunch prison abolitionist. How could I reconcile my wholehearted opposition to the prison industrial complex with a desire to see my own sister locked up? When I look back on that time, I can only comprehend it by acknowledging the insidious, persistent role that prison occupied in my mind. It was closely connected to the role it occupies in larger society. Incarceration serves as the default answer to many of the worst social problems plaguing this country. Not because it solves them, but because it buries them. By isolating and disappearing millions of Americans, more than 2.3 million right now, making us the most incarcerated country on the planet, prison conveniently disappears deeply rooted issues that society, or rather those with power in society, would rather not attend to. Prison, writes Angela Davis, Angela Davis, performs a feat of magic. As massive numbers of homeless, hungry, unemployed, drug-addicted, illiterate, and mentally ill people vanish behind its walls, the social problems of extreme poverty, homelessness, hunger, unemployment, drug addiction, illiteracy, and mental illness become more ignorable, too. But, as Davis notes, prisons do not disappear problems, they disappear human beings. And the caging and erasure of those human beings, mostly people of color and poor people, perpetuates a cycle in which large groups of people are cut off from mainstream society and denied the freedoms, opportunities, civil dignity, and basic needs that allow them a good life. In many jails and prisons, incarcerated people are tossed into a dank, dungeon-like solitary confinement cell when they are determined to have misbehaved. It's dubbed the hole. Isolated and dark, it shuts out almost all communication with fellow prisoners in the outside. Guards control the terms of confinement and the channels, if any, by which words can travel in and out. The whole presents a stark symbol of the institution of prison in its entirety, which functions on the tenets of disappearance, isolationism, and disposability. The solution to our social problems, the mechanism that's supposed to keep things together, amounts to destruction. The disposal of vast numbers of human beings, the breaking down of families, and the shattering of communities. Prison is tearing society apart. This country's most marginalized communities bear the overwhelming brunt of that devastation, but ultimately we are all caught up in the destruction as the politics of isolation ruptures the human bonds that could otherwise hold together a safer, healthier, and more just society. The behemoth that encompasses the prison is called by many names. The most meaningful ones, I think, are those that convey the pervasiveness of its power, the way it infects the world outside as well as the people within. Scholar and activist Beth Ritchie uses the term prison nation, describing it as, quote, a broad notion of using the arm of the law to control people, especially people who are disadvantaged and come from disadvantaged communities, end quote. That control can take the form of prisons, jails, surveillance, policing, detention, probation, harsh restrictions on child guardianship, the militarization of schools, and other strategies of isolation and disposal, particularly deployed against poor communities of color, especially black communities. Others have used prison nation simply to demonstrate the system's vastness, how it infiltrates our culture and fuels our national politics, often in invisible ways. Prison industrial complex, PIC, is another key term. Rachel Herzing of the prison abolitionist group Critical Resistance defines it, and then she goes on through this. It's an extraordinary book, Locked Down, Locked Out by Maya Shen.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program. On the line with us is investigative journalist Mike Rothschild. He's got a new book out. He specializes in conspiracy theories and whatnot, and has been a contributor to the New York Times, the Washington Post, NPR, CNN, MSNBC, BBC, and elsewhere. His new book is The Storm is Upon Us, How QAnon Became a Movement, Cult, and Conspiracy Theory of Everything. Or at least it's new out in paperback with a new wrap-up chapter there toward the end. Mike, welcome to the program, or welcome back to the program. But you've been on our program before.
I have. Thank you. It's nice to be back.
Yeah, thank you. QAnon, burst on the scene a few years ago, and when we had the pizza shop getting shot up and all this kind of weird stuff, and then it kind of became like, okay, this fringy nutball thing, they're waiting for JFK to return, at the age of 100 or something, or his son anyway. And now you're writing over at the New York Times and also in your book that, you think QAnon is gone, or you think it's become like the Moonies, it's a little cult that you occasionally run across, but really the ideas that animate it, or the ideas that it has brought into the public sphere, have integrated themselves pretty aggressively, pretty firmly into the GOP. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So the actual QAnon movement, as we've understood it from October 2017, when the first Q drops showed up until President Biden's inauguration, it really has wound down because it really couldn't do anything else. When you have a prophetic movement based around the President of the United States tweeting that mass arrests are about to be unleashed, and he's not the president, and he doesn't have Twitter, and he doesn't have the power to mass arrest anyone, your movement really has to adapt. So what QAnon has really become is much more of a mythology. The iconography, the branding, the catchphrases, the hashtags, that stuff has started to fall by the wayside. But the ideas of QAnon, the idea of these, pedophile rings running the world and the election being stolen and COVID being a hoax, that is now mainstream conservative orthodoxy. So when you have the orthodoxy of your movement is now mainstream, you don't really need the fringe stuff. And in fact, the fringe stuff really tends to repel people much more than it brings people in.
So how do the fathers, as it were, of the GOP, and I use a sexist term intentionally, it's the vast majority of Republican leadership has always been and continues to be male. How are they looking at this? Is it sort of like, back when Nixon decided with his Southern strategy, hey, let's bring in the Southern white racists because that'll give us enough people to win elections and we'll tolerate their disgusting perspectives? Or is the leadership of the GOP actually starting to believe that, Democrats drink the blood of children?
I don't think the leadership of the GOP really believes that Hillary Clinton is running baby sacrifice rings, or if they do, they don't tend to talk about it quite as much. But what they've had to do is really walk a line between tolerating these people and not pushing them away, but also not really endorsing the most lurid aspects of the movement. So you can say things like, well, I'm not one of those Q people. I'm not crazy. I don't believe there's, pedophile rings running the world, but, the election was stolen and ivermectin is the cure for everything. And COVID was created in a Ukrainian biolab. Those are the ideas of QAnon. You're just not endorsing the really weird, really fringy parts of it. Even though a lot of your base believes that stuff, you have enough people who don't believe it, and you don't really want the bad press of it either. So you're walking a line between not pushing it away, but not tacitly approving of it either.
In particular about Facebook, suggesting that social media generally and Facebook specifically played a huge role in the rise of QAnon. Is that the case, and is that still the case?
Yes, social media really was the birthplace of QAnon. Now, of course, conspiracy theories have existed long before social media, the internet, computers, electricity, but Q itself is a movement based around sharing. It's a movement of sharing memes, decoding of Q drops, videos, books, articles. Without the kind of community that social media fosters, I don't think that Q really would have taken off because it is so fringe. It's so weird. You didn't have meetups of Q people. You didn't have these rallies and conferences that you have now. For a long time, a meetup of Q people in the flesh was 8 people at an Applebee's. Now, of course, it's 5,000 people at a mega church screaming about how Joe Biden's a fake president. So without social media, and really without the tolerance of social media companies allowing this stuff to fester and not stepping in because they didn't want to be seen as censoring or canceling or being unfair to conservatives, I don't think Q really would have taken off in the way that it did.
Which brings us to the obvious next question, which is assuming that this conspiracy theory or this collection of conspiracy theories that have now been integrated into the Republican Party are not good or healthy things for our republic or for the individuals who get sucked into them, what do we as a society, what do we as a culture, what do we as government do about it, and what are the social media companies doing about it?
Well, the social media companies finally cracked down on QAnon and some of the related iconography, but a lot of it took place after January 6th. There was a Twitter crackdown of QAnon in July of 2020, and about 70,000 accounts were suspended. But they found ways around it. They ban evaded using misspelled hashtags. They created new accounts. They would go to places like Gab or Parler and tell everybody what their new account was, because they want to be on mainstream social media. That's where the debates are. That's where the liberals are that they can argue with. That's where new converts are going to be. But what we can do about it as a society is almost nothing, because this is a very difficult problem to deal with at scale. Where we really have to deal with it is in our own lives, in our own families, in our friend groups. And when we see somebody that we care about posting articles about how COVID's a hoax, Biden's a fake president, Jews run the world with their pedophile rings, all the classic stuff, that's where we have to step in as people. But I think looking to certainly the big social media companies, looking to government to deal with this, I think these are problems that these major entities are just beginning to really grapple with. We have to fight these battles ourselves in our own lives.
I don't think most people realize how pernicious this stuff is and what the consequences can be. Back in the 80s, I lived in Germany for a year. I was working with an international relief agency that was headquartered out of Germany. And the guy who was the head of the agency was a soldier in Hitler's army, and one of my colleagues who I worked with had been in the Hitler Youth. And while the guy who was the leader of the organization had completely renounced anti-Semitism altogether, or anything even close to it, the guy that I worked with, had been indoctrinated in the protocols of the Elders of Zion as a 14-year-old, and still believed it. I mean, this was still widespread and is around the world. This theory, of this blood libel against Jews, that is also part of this. Why is there not more focus on that? That was Hitler's major shtick when he basically, turned Germany into a death camp.
Right, and Hitler and the propaganda machine, they got it from a previous generation of propagandists.
That's right,
they got it from
the Russian
generation.
Tsar's intelligence service.
Sure, and this stuff is extremely durable. It works. It hooks people in because it gives you something to blame for your problems. It gives you a scapegoat. It explains to you why things are the way they are, who did it, and what you can do about it. And if you have a propagandistic movement, whether it's the protocols or whether it's QAnon, and it gives you those things, it says, here is who to blame for your problems, here is what we can do about it, that is always going to be alluring. And it feels like as soon as we catch up to the current generation of propaganda, there's already another generation that incorporates the stuff that came before it, adds in new tricks, new techniques, new technology, and we're dealing with that one, and we never really dealt with the first one. So all of this stuff builds one on top of the other, and it creates a universe where here are the enemies, here are the good people, here's what we can do about it. And now with social media, you can connect with different groups of these people in not just in your town, but other parts of your country and other parts of the world. And it is incredibly pernicious.
Are we seeing any, you said Facebook had been, and Twitter had been cracking down on this, but that it's bounced back. How pervasive is this now still on social media, these theories?
It's not as pervasive in places like Facebook and Twitter, but it is everywhere on TikTok. If you go onto TikTok and find any kind of conspiracy that you want, you'll find thousands, tens of thousands of videos. You'll find videos with anti-Semitic tropes, QAnon, anti-vaccine tropes. And these platforms are really struggling to keep up with it. It will always adapt to new technology, will always adapt to the way that people are communicating with each other. Conspiracy theories were one of the earliest adopters to the internet, one of the earliest adopters to the printing press. They will always be a step ahead of everybody else in disseminating their theories and their nonsense on new tech.
We got a hell of a job ahead of us here. Mike Rothschild, the author of the book, The Storm is Upon Us, How QAnon Became a Movement, Cult, and Conspiracy Theory of Everything. Mike, thanks a lot for dropping by. It's great having you on the program today. Yeah. Keep up the great work. Thank you. We'll be back. I got to tell you what Texas is planning to do, or is doing to women right now. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's talk media for the sane among us. Yes, we are still here. And welcome back. John in Troop, Texas. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Tom, I watch a lot of the different programs, including Fox News, and all they talk about is Biden not wanting drilling to be done in the country. And we became an exporting country back during the latter part of the Obama administration. And right now, we export 8.3 million barrels of oil products out of the country every year because the oil companies don't have to pay taxes on everything they export. And the pipeline that they keep railing about that he put a stop to and everything.
Right, Keystone XL.
That the whole plans on that was to export all of that.
Yep.
So it's all taxes. They're making a tremendous profit.
You know, I get the grift, you know, that they wanted to take cheap Canadian oil or tar sands and convert it to expensive petroleum products, refine it in the United States, keep the toxins and poisons in the United States, keep blowing all that waste material down through Cancer Alley in East Texas and Louisiana, and then make their money on the export. I don't understand how there's a tax advantage to them to do that. I mean, if you sell something for export, that's still a sale in the United States. What am I missing?
Yeah. The tax law says they don't have to pay taxes on anything they export. And,
really?
And they take full advantage of that.
So this is one of those loopholes. This is one of those subsidies, essentially, for the fossil fuel industry.
Right.
Is there a name for that?
I don't know exactly what it is, but I mean, I've looked it up on the internet and everything. It's just
and you live in Texas, you might know.
And you know, I've got family members. I've got several family members who have big businesses. You know, working with the refiners and everything, stress welding and everything. So, you know, I know what's going on. I heard I was watching Fox the other day. I like to turn it on and cuss at it every so often. But I was watching Fox, and there was a Democratic congressman who was on there the other day. And as soon as he started talking about the fact that they export all these millions of barrels of oil products, they cut him off and said, well, we got to go to something else.
Is that Ro Khanna? By any chance?
Yeah.
Good on him.
Yeah, but, you know, I mean, they're just lying. They're just lying through their teeth about all the stuff just to get back to Trump and all his cronies is all I can say.
That's their business model, although it may be that Fox is on the verge of abandoning Trump. Fox and Friends, you know, their morning show, which I've been on, weirdly enough. Fox and Friends, yesterday or the day before, just kind of trash-talked Trump, and he went nuts about it. He went on his little Truth social media thing and trash-talked him back. So I'm thinking they're going to be in the bag for DeSantis. They want a fascist, but they don't want a crazy one.
Yeah, well, I just don't see it that way. I see Trump I watch him on his propaganda tours. I see him coming back, and he's got too many followers. 80 million followers in the United States. A quarter of the country follows him. So he'll be coming back, but it irks me to see that they export all this oil and then they turn around and claim that we don't have any oil.
Yeah, I agree. Well said, John. Thank you very much. It's 21 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So the Democratic Party has brought us the women's right to vote, Social Security, the minimum wage law, unemployment insurance, the Rural Electrification Act, the FDIC bank account insurance, GI Bill of Rights. These were all things, by the way, majority of Democrats brought us, majority of Republicans opposed. GI Bill of Rights, Security and Exchange Act, Marshall Plan, NATO, the School Lunch Program, the Water Quality Act, the Peace Corps, the First Man on the Moon, Civil Rights Act of '64, Voting Rights Act of '65, Medicare, Medicaid, Guaranteed Pell Student Loan Programs, Operation Head Start, Workman's Comp, Motor Voter Act, Clinton Budget Surplus, Family and Leave Medical Act, and the Affordable Care Act. And the Republicans have brought us, I mean, you know, for average working people, the Republicans have accomplished, as far as I can tell, nothing. Nothing. Well, they had tax cuts for billionaires. There's a whole video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. 23 minutes past the hour, and I got to tell you what Texas is up to. This is just nuts. This was based on an article yesterday by National Public Radio, NPR, talking about a traumatic experience that a 26-year-old woman in Houston had. Her name is Elizabeth Weller, and she and her husband James wanted to have a baby. She got pregnant. And at 18 weeks, she suffered what's called a premature membrane rupture. In other words, her water broke, which means that with all the amniotic fluid gone, that fetus is not going to survive. It's going to die. And it's going to, in all probability, because the barrier, the tissue membrane that keeps the water in also keeps infections out. The odds of an infection happening in that, particularly when the fetus dies, are just huge. I mean, the way that you respond, the way that modern medicine responds to this is with a quick abortion, and then say, okay, try to get pregnant again, and let's see if we can hold this one together. One study showed that, this is from the NPR article, and I'm quoting. One study showed they were 4 times as likely, this is a woman in her circumstances, 4 times as likely to develop an infection and 2.4 times as likely to experience a postpartum hemorrhage compared with women who terminated the pregnancy. That's a 400% increase in danger. The NPR goes on to note, in some cases, the infection can become severe or life-threatening, leading to sepsis and requiring a hysterectomy, or even leading to death. In 2012, a woman died in Ireland. You'll recall us talking about this on this program. This was a big deal. It's identical situation. This woman in Ireland, her water broke at 17 weeks, 1 week earlier than this woman in Texas. And they refused to give her an abortion at the Catholic hospital that she went to in Ireland, and said, you just have to wait for that baby to die inside you and then come out, through childbirth. And this woman died in Ireland. And that produced a nationwide movement against Ireland's anti-abortion laws. And in 2018, Ireland repealed their anti-abortion laws. Abortion is now, freely available in Ireland. Yeah, obviously there are restrictions, but it's widely available. Now, this woman, Ms. Weller, she was informed that by the hospital and her physician that under Texas law, and I'm quoting here from a piece by, it's over at commondreams.org. They don't carry through their authors when you go to the print view, so I don't have the author. But anyway, it says, in Weller's case, she was informed that under Texas law, she would have to wait for the fetus's heartbeat to stop before a medical abortion could be performed. Meanwhile, her health deteriorated dangerously. She was cramping, passing blood clots, and foul discharge. Now, these are signs of serious infection. They still would not help her. She eventually came to attribute her dystopian nightmare of, quote, physical, emotional, and mental anguish on the Republican state legislators who passed this law. She said, quote, we live in a culture, she's okay now. It finally passed, but she said, we live in a culture that advocates small government, and yet we are allowing our Texas state government to dictate what women do with their own bodies and to dictate what they think is best, what medical procedures they think are best for women to get. And this is not, this is not the first time. There's another story. Marlena Stell, a popular YouTuber, she was 9.5 weeks pregnant, suffered a miscarriage. And again, she was told they couldn't remove the dead fetus. And she had to carry it for 2 weeks. She said, I felt like a walking coffin. You're just walking around knowing that you have something that you hoped was going to be your baby and it's gone, and you're just walking around carrying it. This is crazy. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I have a couple of other just quick updates on the abortion scene, and then I'll pick up your phone calls on the other side of this break.
This
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Homewreckers by Aaron Glantz, a Pulitzer Prize finalist. The subtitle is How a Gang of Wall Street Kingpins, Hedge Fund Magnates, Crooked Banks, and Venture Capitalists suckered millions out of their homes and demolished the American dream. It's quite a subtitle. This is from chapter 21, titled Triumph of the Homewreckers. Donald Trump took the oath of office on a chilly Friday morning, delivering an inaugural address that promised an end to the corruption and impotence that had widened America's historic wealth gap. He understood that his victory had been propelled by harnessing the public's rage and envy at having been left behind in the economic recovery, and that he promised that he would not forget it. Evoking FDR's famous Forgotten Man speech from 1932 that promised to prioritize the needs of, quote, the man at the bottom of the economic pyramid, Trump declared, quote, the forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer. Politicians had prospered, he said, but jobs had evaporated, factories closed. Quote, the establishment protected itself, but not the citizens of our country. Their victories have not been your victories. Their triumphs have not been your triumphs. And while they celebrated in our nation's capital, there was little chance to celebrate for struggling families all across our land. This all changes, starting right here and right now, Trump proclaimed, because this moment is your moment. It belongs to you. This is your day. This is your celebration. End of quote. The moment, however, belonged not to the great mass of struggling Americans, but to the new president's most ardent supporters, flamboyant businessmen who profited off the pain of the housing bust and were now poised to steer the ship of state for at least the next 4 years. As Trump reached out his hand and swore to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States of America, his close friend and inaugural committee chair, Tom Barack, stood behind him, smiling in a blue scarf and black overcoat. Afterward, Barack and Trump embraced at the U.S. Capitol's inaugural platform. The homewreckers had arrived. Barack didn't take an official position in the Trump administration, reportedly turning down an offer to be White House Chief of Staff, Treasury Secretary, or Ambassador to Mexico. Roger Stone told me he could have had any position he wanted, but working for the government would have meant making a lot less money. I don't think he has the belly for public service, Stone observed. Other homewreckers had no such qualms. If they changed the rules of the game now, they could make more money later. Steve Mnuchin, by now dubbed the foreclosure king by his critics, was confirmed as Treasury Secretary. His top deputy at One West, the bank, Joseph Otting, became the nation's chief bank regulator, the comptroller of the currency. Wilbur Ross, the bankruptcy tycoon who bought Florida's Bank United, became the Commerce Secretary, charged with everything from negotiating trade deals to overseeing the U.S. Census. Steve Schwarzman, the chairman of Blackstone, became chair of the White House's Strategic and Policy Forum, a group of business leaders who were to meet regularly with Trump. Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan Chase was named vice chair. Though the group disbanded over the summer after Trump's statement that bigotry and violence on many sides were responsible for a white nationalist killing a counter-protester in Charlottesville, Virginia, Schwarzman, along with Barack, is said to be among a small group of outsiders, including Sean Hannity, who are put directly through to the president rather than being routed through the normal communications channels. Hannity reportedly chats with Trump nightly. Schwarzman has flown on Air Force One. On February 12, 2017, less than a month into Trump's presidency, while the commander-in-chief was dining with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of Japan at his Mar-a-Lago golf club, Schwarzman threw a massive 70th birthday bash at his Four Winds estate, barely a mile and a half away. This time, neither Donald nor Melania Trump could make it, but daughter Ivanka and son-in-law Jared Kushner did, along with Mnuchin, Ross, and a who's who of high finance and culture, from Henry Kravis, co-founder of the hostile takeover firm Kohlberg Kravis Roberts, to the fashion designer Donatella Versace. The party featured live camels, trapeze artists, fireworks, and a gondolier. Schwarzman's tennis courts were covered with Asian-themed staging. The man who'd hired Patti LaBelle to sing Happy Birthday for his 60th was serenaded by Gwen Stefani on his 70th. After Happy Birthday, the peroxide pop star
took a, quote, a quick twirl with the birthday boy around a dance floor constructed inside a two-story tent where acrobats shimmied and jumped, the New York Times reported. Unlike a decade before, when Schwartzman's glorious pre-bust bash sparked condemnation from sources as conservative as the Wall Street Journal, this time the festivities sparked very little blowback. In her story, Bloomberg reporter Amanda Gordon reveled in the comparison with Schwartzman's 60th. There were some differences, though, she wrote. Remember that beautiful fur coat on Melania Trump? It was New York in February on a weeknight. This time, no bundling required, with many folks golfing and swimming all day before a balmy night and fireworks alongside a full moon. Howard Marks, the co-chairman of Oak Tree Capital, a vulture firm that had bought and flipped 3,000 foreclosures, told Gordon, quote, "The world is an uncertain place. A lot of people are unhappy with a lot of other people. There are a lot of things that people are upset about. So it's nice to have an evening where everybody's happy, harmonious, and upbeat." End quote. There was a lot of celebrating to be had. In June, the gang got together for the marriage of Steve Mnuchin and his third wife, actress Louise Linton, almost 2 decades younger than him. And then it continues from there. The book is Homewreckers by Aaron Glantz.
Welcome back. Jessica Valenti, jessica.substack.com is the website for her daily, regular Substack newsletter. And she's been calling it abortion, every day. And then, you know, with the date, basically since the Dobbs ruling. And she's just been doing some amazing reporting. I strongly suggest that you recommend that you check this out. Jessica.substack.com is the website. She notes that the biggest professional research ethics organization in the country just pulled their annual conference out of Utah because of that state's anti-abortion trigger laws. She's raising the question, will Sundance, the film festival, which is going to be in January in Utah, will they pull their film festival because of this? Some folks, speaking of asking folks to take a stand, the New Jersey Star-Ledger, she writes, has an op-ed asking Bruce Springsteen to cancel his concerts in anti-abortion states. Bloomberg points out that Hollywood puts billions of dollars into anti-abortion states like Georgia. In other stories that Jessica Valenti is reporting over at jessica.substack.com, a Wyoming clinic has filed a lawsuit to block that state's abortion ban. We'll see where that goes. In South Carolina, a judge refused to grant Planned Parenthood's request to temporarily block that state's abortion ban. South Carolina Republicans, she notes, are also trying to pass a law that would make it illegal to give out information about how to get an abortion by the phone or through a website. They actually want to censor First Amendment rights. A bill that bars nearly all abortions got one step closer to becoming law in West Virginia, and folks in Tennessee are trying to raise the alarm about the trigger bans there. In Texas, Mothers Against Greg Abbott have put out an excellent ad this week. It's worth tracking down. And doctors in Texas say that their phones have been ringing off the hook from women seeking to have their tubes tied. She writes, people are still on the streets protesting. Demonstrators in Indiana gathered in front of the State House yesterday as legislators debated that state's sweeping abortion ban. And in Philadelphia, a group of women participated in a protest performance where they wore tattered clothing and scrubbed the ground outside of City Hall. One of the activists said, "This is what the people in government take us to be." The washerwomen, essentially. The National Book Award finalist and New York Times bestselling author Erica L. Sanchez has a new book out, Crying in the Bathroom, where she writes about her own abortion experience. Meanwhile, again, Jessica Valenti reports, All in Her Head is the name of her newsletter, reports Representative Matt Gaetz gave a speech where he claimed that pro-choice women are too ugly to worry about getting pregnant. And then he attacked a teenager on Twitter and put her picture up. This is the guy who's under investigation for paying for sex with teenagers. And he's trying to shame a teenage girl for being unattractive. Matt Gaetz is. I can't think of anything more disgusting. Medical students in Michigan, she notes, walked out of an annual event in protest of an anti-abortion speaker. Abortion, by the way, will be on the ballot in November in Michigan. Lawmakers in Indiana are debating legislation that would ban nearly all abortion. State Republicans are claiming, this is still in Indiana, are claiming that they're going to increase services for pregnant people to help them adjust to the forced pregnancy laws. Where's that funding going? It's going to the so-called crisis pregnancy centers, which basically lie to women about, how pregnant they are and what their options are, and refuse to discuss abortion. These are, religious organizations that are now going to be funded by the state of Indiana. In Texas, the lawyers are gearing up for an onslaught of criminal cases. There's a new law in Texas. This isn't just the old, you can be sued for $10,000. This new law it goes way beyond that, $100,000 fines and life in prison. And she writes, the worry isn't just the period tracking apps, but pretty straightforward messaging and web searches as well can be used in court in evidence against women seeking abortions in Texas. And in Colorado, a study from the University of Colorado shows that an abortion ban increases maternal mortality, the death of women, by 24%. It's not like we don't know this stuff. So, picking up your phone calls here. Steve in St. Louis, Missouri. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Wait until they say you can't get pregnant until you're married.
Yeah. Good luck with that.
Yeah. No, I was calling about a follow-up caller you had earlier about diverting the Mississippi.
Uh-huh.
Well, I was reading on the Army Corps of Engineers, the best solution is doing exactly that. They're claiming that right down there in New Orleans, there's approximately 4.5 million gallons per second that flow next by a control structure in the Mississippi River. And they need roughly 250,000 gallons per second to go to Lake Powell and to Lake Mead. But the drawback right now is price tag. The aqueduct in California, that's roughly, 450 miles long, it costs somewhere about $3.5 billion. Mm-hmm. Something like this is going to cost about $55 billion. And the largest amount is going to go, they're going to have to pump the water right there at sea level almost up roughly 2,000 feet.
Wow.
Above sea level, I believe.
That's not going to be cheap.
That will be the most expensive part of all. But the thing is, it'll take, once it's complete, finished, it'll take a year and a half to fill both
Lake Mead and Lake Elsinore?
No, Lake Mead and Lake Powell.
Powell, yeah, thank you.
Right. And also, that'll be continuous. There'll be no of the water going down, water table going down. When Lake Powell was first constructed, it took 17 years for just it to fill naturally.
Wow. So I don't see this happening, Steve. I mean, it seemed, to the best of my knowledge, nothing has been permitted. And Lake Powell and Lake Mead are vanishing rapidly. It seems like we're going to hit a crisis point, or at least, Southern California and parts of Arizona, New Mexico, and Southern Colorado are going to hit a crisis point long before they get the water.
Right. Well, what's going to happen is they're going to have to bypass. Well, the thing is the environmental. That's the biggest one right there.
Right.
And it takes a long time to get approved through the environmental.
But there's also time and money. I mean, just for construction.
That's going to create a lot of jobs, though.
Yeah, of course, for over the short term. I mean, they won't be long-term jobs.
Right, and then there'll be roughly 20,000 jobs spread out for full time, just to keep it going.
Yeah.
But
what will this do to the ability of the Mississippi to flush itself? I mean, you're diverting water away from a waterway. It's going to change how the mouth of the Mississippi and the Gulf of Mexico operate, won't it? I mean, has anybody done a good analysis of the impact of that?
Well, what they're claiming is the massive tax expenditures to repair and strengthen the dikes every year outweighs anything else. Plus, I mean, I told you, 4.5 million gallons per second flow past that control structure.
Yeah, it's huge.
And all they need is roughly 500,000 gallons per second, divided by 2.
Right.
I mean, that's a drop in the bucket.
Relatively speaking, yeah. Well, fascinating,
Yeah,
Steve. I got to move along, but thank you for the information. I do appreciate it. It's amazing how much knowledge my listeners have. I'm just continually amazed. Sharon in Salisbury, Maryland. Hey, Sharon, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Hey, Tom, I have been looking at the Constitution, and I'm looking at our Declaration of Independence, and it keeps coming up with this word liberty and freedom.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just like, well, what is liberty? Because I'm always listening, to the right wing talk about, we want our liberty, don't trade on my liberty. So I'm looking at liberty, and liberty talks about the freedom of government restraint on an individual.
Freedom from.
So now I'm looking at, individual. So I'm going back, and I got to go back to what this last discussion was about, abortion. It's not the government, these Republicans, intruding on women's liberty and freedom to control their own body, to put unreasonable restraint on them. And then, Tom, these men in Congress, these Republicans, they are not doctors. How are they practicing medicine without a license? And what really, really abhors me more than anything are the doctors who are being totally negligent to treat their patient or a patient that comes in and they see that this woman needs help. They see that before these bans that they knew the procedures that needed to be done to save these women's lives.
Yeah.
I have a problem where we're not talking about our liberties. Where are our constitutional lawyers? Where are they? And my last thought is this. Why should we have to abide by these laws if they are unconstitutional? Why aren't these doctors in these hospitals helping these women who need their help if this law is unconstitutional? If these lawyers in hospitals have insurance, then they should go and do what is right, what they took their oath for, and then fight it in the court. And I guarantee you, life will win.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Sharon. I agree with all of your points, and they're very well made. Obviously, the Supreme Court, which is arguably the final authority on what is constitutional and what isn't in the United States, or at least they claim that they are, believes that liberty for women is a completely different thing than the kind of liberty that the framers and founders talked about, and that is enshrined in our founding documents. And for them, it's the liberty to practice their religion and enforce that religious perspective on all the rest of us.
But let me leave you with this, Tom. The Supreme Court, put it down to the state. So the state legislators are making these unconstitutional. They did not say it was unconstitutional.
Right.
They just threw it down to the court.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
These Republicans are killing women. And one thing.
There you go. I'm sorry, Sharon, we're out of time.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's 46 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Monty in Blue River, Oregon. Hey, where's Blue River, Monty?
Well, it's 40 miles east of Eugene, Oregon.
Oh, okay.
We had the big fire.
Yeah. You'd be kind of smack dab in the middle of the state then, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
More or less?
Right.
Yeah. Okay,
and
so
we get a lot of heat here, too. Yesterday it was 107 degrees.
Holy cow. So what's on your mind today, Monty?
Well, I wanted to see his Giuliani. I see the other day he accuses Biden's son of something about Ukraine.
Yeah.
That he's stealing something or whatever. I just want to know what's he doing about that or what.
Biden's son Hunter made a terrible decision when his dad was vice president, to accept a gig that paid him a lot of money to be on the board of directors of a gas and oil company in Ukraine. And you know, he was trading on his father's name, basically. It's not a crime. It's tiny in terms of being corrupt compared to the things that the Trump kids did, among others.
Yeah, right.
But it has become the go-to talking point for the right. Whenever you bring up anything about Trump, they're like, "But Hunter," just like it used to be that whenever you brought up anything about Bush, it would be, "But Hillary's emails." So that's all it is, Monty. I mean, you know, it's a shame that he did it. I can't defend it. I don't know anybody who can. In fact, he's publicly apologized for it. He wrote a book about it. You know, about how you know what a terrible decision it was and how it hurt his father. But it's not going to go away. Monty, thanks for the call. Alfredo in Mountain View, California. Hey, Alfredo, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thank you for taking my call. Yeah, I wrote to Congressman Adam Schiff regarding the possibility of the January 6th committee taking testimony from a psychiatrist regarding the mental state of President Trump. This is a man who is a pathological liar, who is a narcissist, a psychopath. What do you think about that? And I'll take my answer off the air.
Alfredo, are you suggesting that Trump should be given an insanity defense? Oh, Alfredo vanished. I'm concerned that that sort of thing could lead to an insanity defense for Donald Trump. I think that Trump is mentally ill. I agree with his niece, who's been on this program a number of times, Mary Trump, that he is a narcissist, that he's a sociopath, and those are mental illnesses. But typically, those are not the kind of mental illnesses that get you off the hook in a criminal case. And it's not a crime to be a narcissist or a sociopath. If it was, probably 15–20% of your corporate CEOs across the country would be in jail. So I don't see where bringing in a shrink would hurt him, you know, further indict him. And I do think that if there was some sort of definitive judgment made, that it might even work to his defense. So I'm not a fan of the idea. But Alfredo, you hung up before I could ask you more detail about exactly why you think this is a good idea, because it seems like it wouldn't be to me, but maybe I'm missing something. So anyhow, we'll continue the conversation right after this. It's 10 minutes before the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Available wherever you find fine books. So Mother Jones Magazine got a hold of some leaked audio that was taken of Steve Bannon. He was talking with a group of people on October 31st, 2020. That's in the days prior to the election. Now, at this point, everybody in America who was paying serious attention knew that Trump was going to lose this election. The polls were showing this. I mean, he lost by 7 million votes. You can't bury that. You can't hide that. That's a freight train coming down the road at you. He knew he was going to lose. Bannon knew he was going to lose. And Bannon tells this crowd that Trump is going to declare victory on election night because he knows that a lot of the Democrats didn't want to show up in person at the polls because of COVID, and so they mailed in their ballots. Republicans weren't so concerned, and Trump is going to be ahead. And he's predicting exactly what's going to happen, which raises the question, how well planned was this? It really looks like there's a conspiracy. You can check it out. There's a whole video about it at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. 52 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Dave in Lombard, Illinois. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hi, Tom.
Hey, Dave.
Hi. I moved out to Seattle last year. So
okay, I'll update your listing in our database. So what's on your mind?
Yeah, I called you back then, too. I'm an environmental engineer, and I heard your guy talking this little earlier in the program about water, wastewater.
Mm-hmm.
And my business was recycling wastewater. And I keep thinking of Los Angeles and the and the Hoover Dam thing. And for the life of me, we went 20 years trying to get the country to try to recycle wastewater. And they put 6 billion gallons at least out into the ocean a day. And why they can't treat that the minimal standards, the agricultural use, they take 40% of all the water that comes down to Los Angeles for agricultural use.
Mm-hmm.
So you could supplement that with treated wastewater for the agricultural purposes. You would have a 40% gain in water.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense. And the plants, will act as a final layer of filtration before that water becomes your tomato juice kind of thing. Dave,
we always
go ahead.
We always use it for land treatment. I mean, the land is a perfect filter, and it takes all the biological waste out of it.
Right.
I mean, there are heavy metals, but you got to get industry to take their heavy metals out of the water.
Yeah. Which raises a question, and you're the first person who's called on this topic who's actually an engineer. One of the concerns that I've seen for years now, but particularly for the last decade or two, is the really, really high level of drugs, particularly the SSRI family of drugs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors that people take for anxiety. They're something like 1 in 10 Americans is on these drugs, and they are making them into our water supply. Our rivers are filled with them as a result of treated wastewater. How do you filter out when you're recycling water for a city and you're recycling the wastewater of the city? I get how you filter out, big stuff like bacteria or even smaller things like viruses and metals and things, but how do you get out those drugs?
Well, you'd have to go through a reverse osmosis process, possibly. But, I mean, you can get down to microns, of removal. But still, there's some things you probably will never get out. But the land, a lot of this gets caught up in the land, and that land is now dedicated to be for treatment purposes.
Right.
There's a lot of studies. In Australia did a lot of studies 30 years ago on what kind of plants don't take up heavy metals. There's a lot of plants that don't. I mean, you put beets in the ground, they're going to suck up a lot of things you don't want. But like corn, I mean, we tried to get corn, ethanol production for corn. Muskegon, Muskegon back in Michigan.
Yeah.
That's one of the first projects that were made back in the 60s for recycling wastewater. Look at the paper mill down there in Muskegon Bay. I mean, I would recommend people look into that. It is one of the premier places, and never has that been replicated again in the country.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So we've got the technology. Dave, thank you for that. I appreciate the call, and I appreciate your insights. Barbara in Tompkinsville, Kentucky. Hey, Barbara, what's on your mind today? We have just a minute to the end of the show, by the way, Barbara.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about Texas a little bit, but they have passed some incredible laws, and I was looking at, you should, if you haven't seen it, look at the Texas Republican Party platform and what they propose to. They want to abolish child protective services and other things, but they're backwards on a lot of things, regressive, let me say. In the use of force against a child, it says that non-deadly force against a child is justified if the parent uses it believing that it's for discipline.
In other words, it's okay to beat your kids as long as you don't kill them.
Yes. And it even goes on to name, and in domestic violence, it names push, slap, bruise, kick, strangle, threaten with a gun. But the perpetrator must intend to cause physical or emotional harm.
Whoa, you're reading from Texas statute, from law?
Yeah, from the Attorney General's opinion.
Oh, I see. That's amazing, Barbara. Barbara, I got to run. I'm sorry, but we're out of time. But thank you for that. Wow, what a day. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same channel. In the meantime, don't forget democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us, and that includes you. So double check your voter registration, especially if you live in a red state or a state where you got a Republican attorney or Secretary of State, rather. And get out there, get active, tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back! Bye.